Chapter 41. Doom Endless. Unkillable. Li Tang felt wariness settle into him like a second skin. His thin frame, forced to throw punch after punch, had grown tougher from the repetition, yet the interval between his rebirths, the time before the demons cut him down, kept shrinking. The exhaustion was not a fatigue of muscle, but of soul. 0001-203. Time here had no edges, always a blood-red sky over a blood-red desert. To keep some grip on reality, Li Tang kept a careful, almost mechanical count of seconds. Every rebirth, every death. The demons attacked on more than one level. They struck with claws and horns, yes, but they also radiated corruption, a low, insidious whisper that gnawed at a man's heart. It was neither loud nor sudden. It was subtle and ceaseless, omnipresent, eroding resistance like water wearing away stone. Physical creatures surged in endless waves, battering against the defenses Li Tang had made with his hands and his will. He was exhausted in a way that bled through him. Wounds covered his body. Blood flowed everywhere, some his, some not. A demon had bitten off his left hand, leaving stark white bone exposed. In his right hand, he clutched a broken demon horn, using it as a crude weapon as the tide of foes crashed on. His nerves had been taut for so long that even the smallest slackening was dangerous. In one imperceptible lapse, a demon like a mountain of flesh, grinning, its arms fitted with built-in cannons, blew him into dust. He reformed whole again, and the demons swarmed him anew. "What do you want? What do you gain? What do you want me to prove?" Li Tang's spirit cracked. After cycle upon cycle of dying and returning, the pressure in his chest finally burst. He screamed, hysteria shredding his voice, spittle flying. The wasteland answered with nothing but grins from the demons and mocking whispers in the dark, urging him to let go, to give in and rest. "Screw you," he spat. He stopped thinking. Instinct took over. His fists became a blur, slamming into the demons as if to greet the whole brood at once. "Coward!" he bellowed. A roar that split the sky across the blood-red plain, a raw, thoughtless howl. "Worthless!" he cursed. And with a feral motion, his left hand plunged into a screaming demon's mouth, ripping out its chattering tongue. "Weak! Damn it!" he snarled, and kicked a pink, dog-like demon off a pile of corpses. The impact snapped one of the creature's horns free. He jammed the jagged tip into its eye socket. The demon's howl, raw and terrible, echoed through the real-world operating room, its hatred ringing all too familiar to the golden-armored custodians watching. Time lost meaning as the screams and curses tore on. Then, after an unknown stretch, the din finally ebbed. The demons were still there, the man was still there, but he had gone silent, so quiet he sounded numb. Instinct took over. He swung fists and feet, struck flesh with every blow, cutting through the surging tide of attackers. From that stunned silence he poured out his violence. The endless slaughter made him stronger, and yet more fragile. Rage and a murderous hunger took root until he was indistinguishable from the things he'd been killing, beyond hope. In the end, the fury consumed him. His soul seemed to catch fire and burn away into ash. Flames rose from his body. The sickly smell of popping fat filled the operating room. "He's done for," the custodians muttered. The golden-armored men shook their heads with a trace of pity, then silently dragged a hose toward the table, ready to wash the ashes away. If he burned to ashes, then the next round would be a mass trial for 300. No matter the cost, they would forge 300 warriors. The thought crawled through him like a malign insect, and the voices returned, venomous and insistent. "Kill, kill, kill to your heart's content! Kill them all!" The whispering would not stop. Pain crept in, piece by piece, and his soul felt as if it were coming apart, dissolving into the same cold, dead silence the voices insisted upon. A tiny, part of him, what was left of reason, asked faintly, "What do you truly want? What do you want to see?" Li Tang sobbed, helpless and bitter. He kept crying aloud to the blood-red wasteland, demanding an answer, but as always, the wasteland gave none. No one answered. There was nothing, so he gave up. He sank to his knees, exhausted. He did not want to die, but here, alone in this crimson desert, he did not know how to live. Darkness pressed in, and with it a bone-deep cold that stole the last of his warmth. At the edge of oblivion he shivered, and memories rose up, sharp and alive. He saw himself as he had been before, the Himalayan wind cutting like knives, the same raw cold wrapping him, the same barren expanse ahead. He remembered forcing himself forward across that desolate land, straining against the wind. Why did he keep advancing? The cold jolt cleared something in his haze. The answer came, sudden and simple. To live. To stay alive, he drifted between Terra warlords. To stay alive, he dodged wars. To stay alive, he even lay down on the surgeon's table. Are you surrendering to death now? No, I'm just tired. Li Tang rasped as if he were underwater, his mind foggy, choking on breath. He groped for answers and found only questions. Then you surrender to exhaustion? Came the silent taunt. Li Tang didn't answer. He only wheezed, forced himself to his feet, and straightened his spine that had been bowed by fatigue. Come on, demons! He barked into the smoke and blood, voice ragged. Saliva soaked his chin. A rebirth, another cycle, but the slaughter never stopped. This time, however, he had a single clear objective, kill to survive. A startled exclamation from a companion drew the custodian's attention. The figure they'd seen blazing like a torch, flames greedily licking his skin, appeared to dim, to recoil. The custodians watched closely, and with a grim certainty, realized the young man might not be finished yet. 9998. 9999. Li Tang started counting again. He could recall exactly how many times the cycle had reset. As he resumed the ritual of numbers, the fog in his head thinned and the weight of exhaustion eased, just enough for him to keep going. He had clawed his way back from the brink of death, fighting the demons with his bare hands, learning to ignore the clamorous, exaggerated whispers that tried to unnerve him. Slowly, a single fact began to harden in his mind. As long as he lived, there was still a chance. The horror never stopped. No matter how he braced himself, the endless slaughter hollowed him out again and again. 10 years, Li Tang told himself, counting off the cycles like a litany. 10 years of surviving. His body felt unwearied, and his thoughts remained clear. Demons came in waves, group after group, and still he did not collapse. He did not give in to fatigue, and he did not die. But where, he wondered, was the end? 20 years. He kept marking time. His body had grown strong enough to match many of them. He could arm wrestle a demon now. The humanoid fiends that had once dropped him with a single strike were only a nuisance anymore, no longer instant executioners. 30 years. So many times he had wanted to stop, to quit the fight, to let himself be taken, simply to end the unending cycle of killing and being killed. 100 years, he shouted into the ruin, laughing in spite of everything. Ah, it doesn't matter. I'm still alive. I can still laugh. I can still kill demons. 1,000 years. The count reached a number beyond measure, and the laughter died. Li Tang fell silent again. For 3,000 years he slaughtered demons without pause. Day after day, year after year, Li Tang carved a path through the blood-red wastes. Then he discovered something new. Demons could feel fear. That knowledge changed him. His voice, cold and unflinching, cut across the crimson desert and made their spines crawl. Come, it's time to pay your debts. I will drink your fear. I will trample your pathetic courage. He didn't just kill them anymore. He began to ferment them, to prolong their terror until death. He learned to savor the taste of fear itself. So he stalked the blood-red ocean, calling and listening. Demons, demons, where are you? Hide well. I'm coming for you. When none could stand before him, his torment drove them into hiding. Their pain and dread sealed their mouths and kept them underground. The more completely he broke them, the fewer dared to show themselves. Loneliness followed. The demons stopped fighting back. They stopped playing with him. Only the vacant red waste answered. But Li Tang did not surrender to that emptiness. Instead, he hunted for the last small pleasures left to him, began to think for himself, and used the trembling remnants of his foes to harden and temper his own spirit. His martial arts had been sharpening with each cycle, returning to their essence. He learned to read the frailties of life itself and to free even demons with a cold, absolute efficiency. Then the counter clicked over again. 9999, another numerical cycle ended. Li Tang opened his eyes on the same weathered rock. For thousands of years, the demons had not dared come near. They lingered at a distance, watching and worshipping. He rather enjoyed toying with them. They feared power, but revered it as well. 10,000 years had passed. He had grown used to everything here. His mind had swung from sane to insane, and back so many times that it had become unbreakable, tempered by repetition. He kept a demon's severed head beside him. Its endless, muttering chatter had become a lullaby. By now he understood the point of this boundless, isolated trial. It was to forge an unending resilience. Only an unyielding will could be refined into true gold. He must not yield to slaughter, to exhaustion, to madness, to death, or to the cold and perpetual solitude of 10,000 years. I have endured the test. The moment Li Tang spoke his name, after what in that other place had felt like 10,000 years, the endless blood-red wasteland that had trapped him shuddered and began to collapse. The world folded in on itself and was drawn into the rune set into his chest. In the lab outside, his body, which had been close to death, twitched. Color and breath returned. Li Tang opened his eyes and took in the familiar ceiling of the Terra laboratory. He confirmed aloud, in a voice that was oddly flat, "How long have I been lying here?" He had expected elation, maybe even weeping. Instead, there was nothing, calm as still water, no ripple of triumph or relief. The custodians, whose minds were usually precise and unreadable, registered a small, confused pause. They still couldn't explain how the man who had been burning and leaking oil in the trial sphere was now upright and unscathed, asking only about the time. 1 Terra week, 3 hours, 7 minutes, 21 seconds, said the custodian called Plato. 10,000 years of agony and endurance in the trial had been condensed into a single week in reality. Li Tang said nothing. He sat quietly on the operating table, motionless, waiting for the custodian's master to appear. As he expected, a golden light gathered and the shimmering, gilded figure arrived once more. An incredible miracle. The emperor's voice trembled with astonishment. He stared at Li Tang, taking in the change, and finally declared, "Your level of life has been altered." "This goes beyond the limits of biological genetic engineering," he added, prowling around Li Tang 3 times. His hand drifted over Li Tang's broad shoulders and powerful arms, and the custodians surrounding them could barely hide their envy. But the emperor withheld part of what he already knew. Even he could no longer perceive Li Tang's soul in the warp or read his memories and thoughts. Li Tang's soul had fused with his body, untouched by the warp. The soul sustained the body's strength. The body, in turn, protected the soul. They formed a perfect self-reinforcing loop. "Inject the remaining gene seeds," the emperor said, impatient. "I must see what they do." "As you command, my lord," came the ready reply. "No," Li Tang said, his voice low and sharp. "You don't know what that trial is. You would kill everyone." The moment he stepped beyond the trial's boundary, an odd connection sprang up in his mind. In it, he perceived the other 299 gene seeds, and, beyond them, the faint pull of a distant star across an endless void. He understood all too well that if they began creating his brothers without restraint, even Terra's entire population wouldn't be enough. "Then we'll choose them in an orderly fashion," the emperor said at last. He yielded to the one with first-hand experience, then turned his attention to Li Tang's tall, imposing figure. "Custodians, give him armor that will temporarily conceal his true nature," he ordered, "and notify my personal armorer. I want to design the armor for the 21st Legion myself." The Legion's firstborn. The emperor faced Li Tang, voice solemn. "The 21st Legion will have a given name. I hope you will not fail it." "Destroyer Warrior," Li Tang answered, the name ringing out like a vow. Author's note: thanks for the rewards. If you have recommendation tickets, please cast them, a humble author asks. The Terra arc is finished. From here on, it's the protagonist's main story. The Terra arc was necessary, even if the reception and execution were a bit lacking. Chapter 42, Warlord. "What's wrong?" Harlan asked as they sparred on the War College training grounds. Doom, all 3 meters of him, had frozen for a moment. Harlan took advantage of it. His long sword flashed and struck Doom's stone blade, snapping it cleanly in 2. He sheathed his sword and offered the salute of a true warrior. They'd been training together for 2 months, and Harlan had never beaten his master. This victory, likely down to luck, gave him no satisfaction. Doom didn't try to hide his unease. "I felt something," he admitted. "Far away, but I could feel its presence clearly." "Distracted because your father is returning?" Harlan guessed. Doom shook his head, hesitant. "No, it shouldn't be my brother." The feeling was faint but real. Doom could sense a small star burning somewhere in his soul, a presence weaker than his own. It wasn't the equal bond of a brother at all. It felt like the link between a superior and a subordinate. As for you, Doom said, watching Harlan with a cold appraisal as sweat trickled down the older warrior's face. Your improvement over the last few months is illogical. Harlan was barely over 100 years old. In the main defense territory, where people commonly lived past 300, that might still count as prime, but Harlan had already passed his peak. Years of battle scars and wear had inevitably taken their toll. Sure, the decline could be slowed by discipline and lifestyle, but it could not be erased. Yet Doom had noticed something impossible. Harlan had been going through a second spring of strength, repeatedly surprising him during their sparring sessions. That's a mystery I'd like solved too, Harlan replied with a bitter, helpless smile. For a warrior, strength was a matter of pride. But pride turned uneasy when power appeared for no apparent reason. Under the warrior's law, any abnormal phenomenon that defied reason was automatically suspect. The Nur people were descendants of the Golden Men, blessed with great power but burdened by it. Without continual maintenance of their genetic code, the Golden Men's line had begun to degenerate. Their descendants' genes were unstable and prone to uncontrollable mutation. Harlan's sudden resurgence, then, looked less like a miracle and more like something that demanded investigation. The Night Watch and the people of the main defense territory had relatively stable genomes and rarely suffered mutations from genetic collapse. Still, specialized review agencies monitored every citizen closely, carrying out regular genetic tests and medical exams to prevent a collapse and any resulting chain reaction. Harlan had been examined so many times he'd lost count. After a period of decline, his bodily functions had returned to peak condition a few months earlier, and he'd even grown a few centimeters taller. Anxious by nature and bound by the warrior's code, the champion swordsman routinely inspected his own mind to guard against the psychological problems that often accompany biological abnormalities. "This is so annoying," he snapped, and a perfectly ordinary sparring match ended with his irritated outburst. The champion swordsman bristled, feeling unsettled. "Why do those examiners, the ones who look at everyone as if they're mutants, come straight to you?" he demanded. Someone else shrugged. "You've shot up 3 meters in a year, and you're still growing." "I've only put on a few centimeters," Harlan shot back, "and they swarm me like wolves, treating me like a ticking bomb." "That's their job," Doom said with genuine admiration, his tone solemn. "Being a gene examiner isn't easy." Harlan felt his agitation spike. He studied Doom again, trying to reconcile the man before him with the rosy-cheeked boy he once knew. The change was startling. Doom's hair was neatly cropped and black. His features were sharply defined, thick, dark brows above intense black eyes, a prominent nose bridge, and a long, straight jaw that gave him a statuesque, almost godlike presence. His bare torso showed every muscle in relief, skin glowing with a healthy sheen. The boy he remembered was gone. In his place stood a commanding, mature figure who inspired something like reverence. The bands of muscle along his flank stood out like a shark's, and the mysterious blood-red mark on his chest sat dark between those bulging pectorals. His abs were cut and defined, such a perfect human form that even the finest sculptors would struggle to capture its raw power. Harlan studied him and smiled with a quiet pride. He sometimes had to admire himself for still managing to behave like an ordinary man, treating this godlike, formidable figure as a friend and brother. The teachers of the school watched Doom with such reverent deference that it was almost comical, and the schoolgirls, pretending modesty, could not help stealing glances. Their flushed faces and trembling knees gave them away. "Your father will be back soon," Doom said. "When he returns, you and I should be able to go with him to the battlefield." Harlan's eyes lit up. With King Nawick's return, he dared hope that he and Doom would finally be allowed to follow the king to the front. Since being posted in the main defense territory, apart from the first few days of rest, the champion swordsman had spent every spare moment glued to reports from the front lines. He wanted, someday, to go back to the battlefield with his father and fight at his side. Doom's talents made that a very real possibility. His capacity to learn and understand was uncanny. He'd already passed the warrior assessment 2 months ago and been promoted to Night Watch. From enrollment to graduation, nobody expected that in 7 months, a child under a year old would finish what took decades for any Golden Men heir. "I'm not thinking about glory on the field," Doom said, shaking his head. "I'm more worried about my father." Going to war was only a matter of time. It was his father's condition that kept him awake at night. Since seeing his father off on campaign, the reports brought by the royal messenger had grown increasingly bleak. His father's body was failing and his mind was slipping. The accompanying physicians could find no illness, no genetic degradation, nothing to explain the decline. Harlan fell silent. As Doom's personal guard, he had watched the boy closely. The more he knew of Doom, the more he understood him. The battlefield posed little real danger to Doom. Honor, for him, was a fruit easily plucked. It was his father's health that worried him most. Only his family occupied the softest, most cherished part of his heart. "Brother is here!" Doom's heightened senses picked up a familiar aura racing toward them. Flano Novik came running, face drawn, sweat beading on his brow. Something was very wrong. Both men's expressions darkened at once. The urgency and tension on Flano's face told them that. Harlan barked orders and called over a few apprentices to help Doom into his power armor, getting him into fighting condition as fast as possible. Doom moved with astonishing speed, surging forward to meet his brother. "Doom!" Flano panted, grabbing his arm. "Quick, father has returned. He's waiting for you in the council hall." Doom's pupils pinched tight. He understood immediately how serious this was. A king who returned in triumph would pass beneath the triumphal arch as a symbol of victory. A secret arrival could mean only one thing. Something major had happened. "You go first," Flano urged, already knowing Doom's speed and not wanting to slow him down. "Don't wait for me." "Harlan, stay with brother." Doom nodded once to the armored guard, then sprang away, moving almost supersonic. When he reached the council hall, the civil and military officials were already gathered. The air inside was heavy and silent. King Noak sat slumped on the throne, eyes closed, a needle in a vein of his left hand, delivering a steady life-supporting fluid. He looked terrible, drawn and hollow-cheeked, his once regal frame wasted away. His aquiline nose jutted like a ridge over sunken sockets. His hair was streaked white and hung limply, like dead grass. Seeing his father reduced to this, Doom's eyes trembled. He couldn't understand how, in only a few months, the great, powerful man who had raised him could have deteriorated so completely. He dropped to one knee before the throne and took his father's right hand, paper-thin, weak, and so cold it felt almost lifeless. After a long pause, the king stirred. Doom is here," he murmured, and his eyes opened to fix on his son, roused by the small warmth in that hand. His father's eyes were proud and steady, every line of his face set with an unshakable resolve. "You will be made warlord and continue the hunt for the remaining orcs," King Noak declared. Doom blinked in surprise but asked no questions. No civil or military official in the hall objected. This had clearly been decided. Warlord was a wartime title, the supreme commander for military operations. A servant stepped forward with a tray bearing a sword and a seal, the symbols of authority to command the night watch. "You have only half the army," King Noak added in a weary voice, as if reminding his son of the difficulty before him. "I understand," Doom replied evenly. "I will end the orc war as quickly as I can." He took the sword and the seal with resolute eyes, accepting his father's authority and the responsibility that came with it. "You may all go." Noak dismissed the council and their attendants. Once the hall emptied, only father and son remained. They exchanged a long, knowing look, and Noak steeled himself to answer the questions Doom had been holding back. "You're worse than you let on," Doom said as soon as the doors closed. "Whatever struck you looks like a psionic curse. They weren't trying to kill you, they were testing us." "Our enemies have changed," Doom went on. "The greatest threat is no longer the orcs, it's the wizards of the City of Truth." "You know I'm confused," he added more gently, "but you must follow the king's command." Noak's voice came out thin and labored. Each word was a small effort. "Son, my orders for you are the result of careful thought." The king managed a faint smile. Doom's sharpness pleased him. His son's reasoning was sound and almost right. But there were things Doom could not see. He had no contact with the gods, and his sight was limited. This was not merely a psionic malady, it was a test from the gods' dark will at work. You're almost right, Nowick admitted quietly, which is precisely why I'm sending Ennio with the other half of the Night Watch to blockade the City of Truth. Doom's brow tightened. You mean, let Big Brother take on the City of Truth? That's too dangerous. Why won't you let me go? Nowick wanted to spit back. Your going is the real danger, but he couldn't force the words out. The warp gods had already made their move, and the City of Truth was their pawn, set squarely on Doom's trail. He knew why his body had become what it was. Months ago, 4 gods had slipped into his soul, gnawing away at his sanity and trying to make him their puppet. For a long time, the king had been fighting them inside his own head, feeling his conscience torn and battered by a torment no blade could touch. He resisted. He clung to what remained of himself. He understood Doom's talents and his raw strength, but after a lifetime of wisdom, he understood the gods' shamelessness even more. Their fixation on Doom was the heart of their design. They wanted his son, in body and in mind. Their plan was subtle and patient. They were using the faith of the City of Truth to worm into Nur's purity, to make that purity a beacon that would drag Doom into their embrace. That kind of corruption could not be rushed. The gods needed time to prepare their infiltration. Nowick had to buy time. And Doom needed time to grow. Nowick desperately wanted to tell his son Doom that the true enemies were the gods behind the priests, that they were the source of all darkness. He couldn't. The gods watched him, and he watched them back. But exposing their hypocrisy too soon would only make them more reckless, and their revenge would be visited on all of Nur. It was safer to keep their attention fixed on himself than to let them choose their victims at will. He didn't dare. Standing before the gods and feeling their power, Nowick felt acutely the helplessness of being human. Even he, Nur's most resilient spirit, found he could remain conscious under their baleful gaze for shorter stretches. His body kept going only by life-sustaining medicine. Doom was extraordinary. Perhaps his body and soul could resist the gods, but could his convictions? There was a world of difference between passively resisting and actively seeking them out. The gods' temptations were everywhere, and even their promises had tempted Nowick. He would not gamble on Doom rejecting them. Nowick wouldn't gamble on the present. He had to buy time and bet on the future. He pinned his hopes on Ennio, the son he had so carefully raised, hoping Ennio would grow the cooler head and wider perspective needed to see through the gods' hypocrisy and fear. After a long, slow pause, Nowick finally said in a low voice, Ennio will do very well. You needn't worry. He's more mature than you and can handle the blockade. Doom said nothing in reply. His older brother was, apart from their father and himself, the steadiest and most intelligent man he knew. Imply blockading the City of Truth should be well within Ennio's capabilities. Nowick urged him to go. Leave now. Tell Harlan to come to me. I have a task for him. Go prepare, Nowick added. Harlan will travel with you. The frontline troops are waiting. I understand. Doom rose and left at once. There was no time to lose. An army could not wait a day for its commander. He would follow his father's plan, take down the orcs as swiftly as possible, then redirect his forces to confront the new enemy. He was sure his father's illness was tied to the priests of the City of Truth. At the doorway stood his elder brother, Ennio Nowick. Ennio wore a plain royal robe and a single gold signet ring stamped with the family crest. His golden hair and blue eyes were their mother, Queen Daisy's, and his calm, elegant manner echoed hers. He was no rival to King Nowick's martial strength. Tall, slender, and refined, Ennio looked every bit a courtier rather than a warrior. That said, he was not to be underestimated. As the eldest son, he wielded the greatest authority beneath the king. His face showed nothing, unhurried, composed, yet Doom read a thread of anxiety in the smallest shifts of expression. There was no time for words. They exchanged a brief, knowing nod, and Ennio went into the council hall. Doom turned away and moved at once. He found Harlan and Flano, told them the situation in a few clipped sentences, then went to say goodbye to his mother. Ennio, King Nowick gasped, his breath coming in ragged, painful bursts. He looked worse than before, as if each word cost him dearly. My eldest, my greatest hope. Ennio dropped to one knee without hesitation. This was no time for sentiment. The urgency in his father's voice demanded action. I need you to take half of the night watch and seal off every outward route from the City of Truth. No one gets in. No one gets out. Do not let a single person escape. Kill them all, Nowick added, his tone thin but razor-sharp. Nothing that comes from that city may be allowed to spread. Eradicate it all. The men of the Night Watch will face something they've never faced before, he went on. Put up strict mental barriers, shields against psionic influence. What if they try to break the blockade? Ennio asked, brows drawn together as he ran the logistics through his head. How long must we maintain it? He pressed, estimating supplies, rotations, and the human cost. Nowick's gaunt features flashed a rare, contemptuous smile. They won't try to break out, he scoffed. Not until they're absolutely sure. The gods' current reach is limited. They need time to gather strength. Ennio absorbed that, understanding the calculus as well as his father did. Patience now would mean preventing a far greater threat later. If it weren't true, they wouldn't be whispering in his head, using insidious psychic tactics to sow discord in the dark. Nowick's expression hardened as he turned to his eldest son. You know how dangerous psionics can be, he said sternly. Keep the Night Watch constantly interrogating themselves, always watching their own thoughts so nothing slips in unnoticed. I understand, Ennio answered. As for how long the blockade will last, Nowick's voice was decisive but deliberately vague. Once Doom destroys the orcs, he will come to reinforce you immediately. Then the two of you will combine your forces and begin the next operation. How long that takes depends entirely on your heaven-sent brother, on what he can accomplish. Ennio's hand tightened. He bowed his head. I understand. We will seal the city and wait for reinforcements. To completely blockade the City of Truth and wait for Doom's arrival was to entrust everything to his brother. There was no other choice. Nowick felt the turmoil roiling in his eldest son's heart and called out, Ennio. It pains me to entrust your fate to Doom, King Nowick said, his voice raw with feeling. You must know and understand why I do this, he continued. Your foresight does not reach as far as mine, but you should at least grasp what is happening now. Enemies we have never seen or even comprehended have appeared. Our strength and wisdom are not enough to face them. We must rely on an outside power, and until that power comes into its own, we must protect him. The old king gathered what strength he had left and fixed his son with a bright, earnest look. This is an unprecedented challenge and an unprecedented opportunity. If we succeed, Nur will be reborn, and a wider world will open for you. I understand. Ennio drew a long breath and accepted the burden laid upon him. He knew his father had a plan, and that, in the shadows, Nowick had already begun to fight those nameless foes. One by one the sons rose and left. The council hall fell silent. When the last footsteps died away, King Nowick expelled a ragged breath and murmured to the empty room, Gods, you have made your move, and I have cast my dice. In this careful game, I am wagering all of our future. I don't have the chapter text yet. You only included a line and a short note. Please paste the full chapter you want rewritten, or upload it. Once you do, I'll rewrite it into natural, idiomatic English while keeping all characters, plot points, and details. A few quick questions to make sure I match your expectations. Approximate length of the chapter, word count, or paste the whole thing. Tone style you prefer, faithful to the original, smoother, neutral, more polished, professional, or more dramatic novel-like. Any names, terms, or stylistic choices you want preserved exactly, names, honorifics, in-universe terms. Any content concerns, sexual content, extreme violence, spoilers, I should be aware of when rewriting. Do you want translator notes kept or removed? If helpful, here's a quick sample rewrite of the lines you posted. Original, now it is your turn to play. Brothers, please keep reading these 2 days. Please give me some data. Rewritten, now it's your turn to play. Guys, please keep reading over the next 2 days. I'd really appreciate some feedback. Paste the chapter when you're ready, and I'll get to work. Chapter 44. He must be killed. Harlan felt oddly out of place when he stepped into the council hall. He was not accustomed to solemn assemblies. On the throne, King Nowick looked frail in a way that both surprised and unnerved him. Whatever illness or injury had taken the king's strength was plain to see. and Harlan found himself wondering how a man so respected by warriors could have been reduced to this. At the king's side sat a figure in black robes, hood drawn low so the face was hidden. A flash of displeasure crossed Harlan's features before he schooled them into neutrality. He knew those hooded figures, the faceless psychers, anomalies within the main defense territory, trained for psychic warfare and placed directly under the royal family's authority. Harlan went down on one knee, the champion swordsman giving the customary salute. "My king," he said, voice steady and strong. "Champion swordsman, Harlan Ogilvy." King Nowik's voice came back weakly, but it carried the weight of a summons. "Can I trust you?" The question settled on Harlan like a physical weight, the feeling that the king's hopes, perhaps the fate of many, were being placed squarely on him. He answered without hesitation, "My second oath. I will never fail King Nowik." Harlan bowed his head until his forehead nearly touched the floor. Every fiber of him pledged to fight for Nur, to spill his blood for King Nowik. Then the king said something that hit him like a thunderclap. "What if I ask you to violate your third oath, to uphold your first and second, the guardian vows you once made, and kill Doom?" The words detonated inside Harlan's skull. His head buzzed, nerves jangling, cold sweat soaked into his armor. The first oath, the Night Watch's original duty, was to protect Nur. The whole watch had been built around that vow. Hearing the name Doom twisted Harlan's face with a bitter pain. Had the king learned something so terrible that he intended to remove Doom to safeguard Nur? "My king, are you certain?" Harlan asked through clenched teeth. He had served Doom only a short while, but he had watched him grow. Doom had been teacher, friend, and the man to whom Harlan had sworn his oath. Whatever the politics, the request felt monstrous, a father being ordered to kill his son. It was a transgression the main defense territory had never seen since its founding. Above all else, Harlan felt that King Nowik had overestimated himself and underestimated his son. A being that powerful would be a boon as an ally. As an enemy, you could only pray for a quick death instead of being slowly ground down. "I want to be clear, champion swordsman. If I asked you to kill Doom, what would you do?" Nowik leaned back on the throne and watched Harlan with a hard, appraising stare, waiting for an answer. "I will uphold my first and second oaths." Harlan let out a long, weary breath, as if giving that answer had taken everything he had. Protecting Nur was an unbreakable commandment, one the Night Watch would never violate. "Very good. Your answer satisfies me." Nowik nodded. He motioned to the Psyker Master at his side. "Raise the barrier." There were absolute secrets he would entrust only to the champion swordsman. "Champion swordsman, come closer." Hesitant but obedient, Harlan stepped into the shimmering psychic field. Once the barrier sealed, Nowik pressed the headrest of his throne. The null crystal embedded there flared, folding open another layer of dimensional protection. A tingling crawled across Harlan's scalp, as if some invisible force were drawing him toward a vast vortex where his choice would matter. To his surprise, King Nowik produced a strange orb and opened another transparent barrier. Harlan was certain such an object had never been seen in the human civilization of Nur. It glowed a pale gray with a jade-like sheen. Its surface was etched with impossibly intricate lines, yet it looked seamless, as if it had never been manufactured at all. "Now we can talk freely." With the 3 layers of barriers raised, the exhaustion on King Nowik's face eased. He let out a relieved smile. "Champion swordsman," he asked, "do you believe there are gods in this world?" "No." Harlan's answer came firm and immediate. There were no gods in the universe. Humans had first broken free of their atmosphere on crude chemical rockets and then searched the stars, finding nothing to suggest gods existed. His certainty made King Nowik's smile thoughtful. Not long ago, the king had held the same belief. The truth, as he now knew, was stranger. The gods were not part of the universe at all. They dwelt in the warp, beyond the veil of reality, silently watching the creatures that lived inside the cosmos. "There are gods in this world," Nowik said, his voice low and grave. He touched the throne and brought up its projection, which filled the air with a scrolling display of Harlan's body data. As a king who spent his life on the front lines and oversaw every detail of the main defense territory, his gaze missed nothing. "Harlan Ogilvy, you must have felt the changes in your body," he said. Harlan opened his mouth, then shut it again. He had no answer. He neither believed in gods, nor understood what scientific explanation could account for the strange things happening to him. Still, he could not deny the evidence the projection showed. "You're unlucky," Nowick continued, "that a god has fixed its eyes on you. You're lucky, too. It values you. Its attention is making you stronger, little by little." "Are the gods constantly watching me?" Harlan asked. Nowick nodded toward the translucent barriers that shimmered around them. "Look at the defenses I've put up," he said. "Who do you think those measures are meant to keep out? Eavesdroppers? Prying eyes?" Harlan removed his helmet. His tiger-like eyes locked onto the king's, fierce and searching. "Sire," he asked quietly, earnest and unafraid, "have you ever seen a god with your own eyes? They speak to me day and night, right here." Nowick tapped his temple and smiled with a sneer, not at Harlan but at the gods. "Who do you think put me in this miserable state?" Harlan dropped to one knee, a cold, killing resolve carved across his face. "Then I will believe in gods if I must, and I will put my sword to their throats." A weight lifted from Harlan's mind. The thing he feared most was that his king might be led astray by divine whispers, pulled off the warrior's path, and driven to do outrageous things that would harm Nur. "I swear it," he said. "If Doom ever turns to the gods, I will find any way, use any method, and I will kill him." The champion swordsman's eyes were steady and hard, the calm of a man who has made peace with death. He knew Doom's strength, and yet he pledged without hesitation, drawn as inevitably as a moth to a flame. Nowick nodded, satisfied. "Very good." Harlan's judgment was clear. He knew right from wrong. "Open your mind and let the Psyker Master seal this in you," King Nowick said. "Hide these conversations, these promises, these memories from the god's sight. Plant a suggestion deep in his mind," he told the Psyker Master, "so that if Doom ever strays from the path, those memories will surface and he will know what to do. As a father, I pray that day never comes," Nowick added softly, "but this is my final arrangement for you, champion swordsman." Nowick spoke with the care of a man who had planned every contingency. He explained everything to Harlan slowly and plainly, laying out the fallbacks and fail-safes he had set in motion. "With the utmost respect," he finished, rendering his gratitude and trust in a voice that trembled only slightly. Harlan closed his eyes and lowered his mental guard. He felt the Psyker Master's presence probe and settle, patient and sure, and allowed the work to begin. He understood his role in Nowick's design, the last safeguard. He could not unmake what had already been lost, only stop the corruption from spreading further. When the Psyker Master was done, the procedure dissolved like mist. Harlan's memory of the intrusion was gone. All that remained was the quiet cert, ain't he, that it was time for him to go. He rose, bowed, and left, carrying with him a mind sealed against gods and men alike. Harlan Nowick needed no explanation. The moment the Psyker Master stepped into the room, he understood. His memories had been rewritten, and he had consented to it. The Master stood alone. His voice was dry, but it carried a depth that had nothing to do with age. "King Nowick, I was very much looking forward to the ending of the story you were crafting. Yet, sadly, I will not live to see it." "Your service is honored, Psyker Master. What you have done, even if it will be forgotten, will echo far beyond this room." He had asked the Psyker Master to erase what had happened inside the barrier, every arrangement he had made, every secret kept within those wards. It was a deliberate sacrifice of memory to shelter what must remain hidden. "Goodbye." From beneath the Master's hood, Nowick caught the ghost of a smile. "I wish you ultimate victory in your game against the gods." As he finished, prismatic psychic flame bloomed around the Psyker Master. In a calm as smooth as water, flesh and spirit alike were consumed and turned to ash. Nowick bowed his head in solemn respect, closed the orb he had used, and withdrew the wards that had enclosed them. The game had only just begun, and someone had already chosen to give their life to keep its secrets. The brief calm passed, and the gods' decadent voices returned. His mind became a debate hall once more. Mortal wisdom, trying to reverse the game? That ancient artifact shielded our sight, but it cannot change the outcome, one voice sneered. Man proposes, God disposes, another snapped. The next plan, dear readers, is the eagerly anticipated Great Crusade. There should be 3 updates today. Right? Right? Bring on the votes. Chapter 45. "You are too slow. We need to go faster," barked a voice over the comms. Doom and Harlan streaked through the canyon on anti-gravity motorcycles, the wind a ripping scream past their helmets. "Stay behind me," Doom ordered. "Just watch me. Don't worry about the terrain changing." Doom slammed the throttle. His bike answered with a thunderous roar, punching through the sound barrier as he surged to the front to lead and give Harlan a reference. Harlan's perception ran on a different clock. With reactions beyond what any sensor could measure, the canyon's constantly shifting walls and boulders blurred into slow motion for him. Even Doom's supersonic run felt sluggish to Harlan, an almost casual pace compared with how fast Harlan could process and respond. Doom had offered to carry him to save time, but Harlan had refused. Beep, beep, beep. The bike's scanners popped warnings. An orc patrol was posted at the canyon exit ahead. "Don't slow down," came the reply over the comms. "Keep going." The roar of the anti-gravity motorcycles carried down the ravine and caught the orcs' attention. They answered with eager, guttural shouts, hungry for a fight as the two riders closed in on the exit. Whoosh! The two anti-grav motorcycles peeled away without slowing, leaving a thin, supersonic shriek in their wake. The orc youngsters were already jeering at what they took for cowardice when an iron fist filled their vision. Before they could blink, their limbs went numb, and a huge human hand closed over a head. In a single heartbeat, Doom leapt from his bike and with bare hands neutralized the 10-man patrol in 0.2 of a second. Then, accelerating on foot, he caught up to one of the motorcycles still streaking away at supersonic speed. He crushed the rider's skull effortlessly, scooped out the warm brain, and swallowed it in one motion. The orc's memories flooded his mind. After a year of training, Doom had learned to compartmentalize those stolen memories. He created a dedicated store in his brain so acquired information would not disturb his own judgment. "Follow me," Doom barked. "Turn 12 degrees left. 10 kilometers ahead in the valley, about 3,000 orcs are gathered there." The little patrol had only been a scouting unit. Doom intended to wipe out the main force, and he knew it wouldn't take him long. 10 kilometers out, the motorcycles held their pace, tearing through the winding canyon. "I'll go ahead," Harlan called. He flicked on the bike's protective force field, engaged his own armor shield, and the null crystal set into the motorcycle's foreplate flared to life. Large, fin-like cutting blades slid into position along the chassis. "Green-skinned mongrels," he roared. His challenge reached the orcs before he did. The champion swordsman's voice, louder than the bike's engine, sliced through the canyon. "Your grandpa is here." Camped in the woods, the green-skinned orcs froze, then erupted in fury at the taunt. A fight right at their doorstep? Perfect. They snatched up whatever weapons were at hand, swords, spears, clubs, even crude firearms, and surged out howling. The long, narrow valley funneled their formation like a twisted green snake, exactly the terrain Harlan wanted. The motorcycle's forward cutting cannon whispered as it discharged long slashes of energy, each beam amplified by the canyon's confines. The high-speed bike became a projectile, slamming into unprotected bodies like a deadly bullet. Dimensional blades of light reaped the battlefield. A single sweep left bodies strewn across the ground. Nothing survived the rending arcs. Harlan's motorcycle cleaved through the orcs like a harvester through wheat, bisecting foes on both sides and in front. Hot blood spurted, severed torsos writhed and screamed, crawling over the dirt with weapons clutched in blood-slick hands. After the strike, Harlan adjusted the bike's suspension and pulled back. The motorcycle and its rider, splattered red, shot off like a crimson arrow. An old cavalry trick, simple, brutal, and effective. A moment later, a gladiator-like figure dropped down from above. Doom's upper torso was almost bare, held together only by a leather strap that linked his shoulder pads to his belt. A skirt of armor barely covered to mid-thigh, and heavy combat boots rose to his calves, leaving his knees and much of his thighs exposed. The outfit looked wild, but it wasn't meant to flaunt savagery so much as accommodate necessity. Doom had grown too fast, and the forging masters didn't have consistent data to forge fully custom power armor for him. What he wore was an unavoidable compromise. The simple armor couldn't hold a power core. It offered no miracles, only Doom's raw strength. Spikes jutted from the knuckles of his left gauntlet, and a dimensional lightsaber burned in his right hand. He dove straight into the pile of orcs. There were no roars, no war cries, only a silent, efficient slaughter. Doom moved so fast the orcs couldn't even register him. Their green eyes simply couldn't follow his speed. A single light punch reduced one orc's skull to powder. A kicked stone flew through several bodies like a thrown spear. The glowing blue blade in his hand blurred into a shimmering disc that sliced through flesh as cleanly as a mirror, leaving wounds so smooth there wasn't yet a spatter of blood. Before the first orc felt its life leak away, Doom had already finished his harvest. He had cut down 8 when something odd prickled his senses. An unusual, intent gaze locked on him. He didn't pause. His sword arm kept moving. Now, as the new warlord, he poured a tangled fury into the blade, worry for his father, racing doubts and speculation, letting it all spill into the light and unleash. In an instant, the tally leapt, from 8 to 88. At one moment he was invisible, an untouchable blur, and the next he appeared only as a streak of blue light, leaving nothing but fragments of orc corpses in his wake. Harlan had parked his bike on a high ridge and didn't join the attack. He leaned against the motorcycle, letting the weight of the long ride ease from his shoulders, and watched. He understood Doom's agitation. The kid was impatient, desperate to help his father, and it showed in every reckless, brilliant move. The valley below looked like a slaughterhouse, blood everywhere, shattered bodies blown through the air. Harlan found himself marveling at the young man's power. His expectations, already high, climbed still higher as he tried to follow the fight. He couldn't lock onto Doom's body, only the scattering particles of azure light from the blade, fading after images hanging in the air, and streaks of blood marking where the light had been. A strange, abstract beauty tugged at him. Amid that blooming sea of blood-red bodies, a blue butterfly of light beat its wings, and wherever it passed, the red seemed to deepen. His helmet's diagnostics, however, were anything but poetic. The normally hyper-accurate scanners couldn't get a lock on Doom, and the targeting assist simply couldn't keep up with his movements. The readouts were alarming. If I were to shoot him, how would I aim? How would I predict where he'd be? The thought slipped into Harlan's head as if by accident. A cold knot tightened in his spine. The idea was absurd, dangerous. He shook it off before it could take hold. In the space of a few breaths, thousands of orcs lay in pools of blood, not even knowing what had struck them, confusion frozen in their vacant eyes. Doom could feel a presence watching from the void, quivering with excitement at the carnage. He suspected what it was, that thing that called itself the God of Warriors. Let it watch, he thought. He felt no internal resistance. He was powerless to it, and it only watched, doing nothing. What the hell is? The orc's frantic howl cut off mid-scream. A sword swept through its lower jaw and tongue, and then its great head slid free from its shoulders. Doom's blade never faltered. Calm and unbothered, he sneered at their gods as he struck. Tell your Gork and Mork about this. He kept cutting them down, unrelenting, his mockery of their faith inging loud over the slaughter. After tearing into the orc's skull and eating its brain, Doom found the knowledge that came with it as plain as a memory. He now knew the two gods the orcs worshipped, Gork and Mork. Gork was cunning yet brutal, Mork was brutal yet cunning. For a moment, he even entertained the thought, there are no gods in this world. Then a sudden flash of insight hit him. On the blood-slick field, his damaged but extraordinary mind began to work at high speed, dredging up fragments and fitting them together. The image of Isaac, collapsed in the mud and weeping, surfaced clearly. His broken words snapped into place. Doom's face went colder, and his slaughter became quicker. He dissected Isaac in his head, tied him to the city of truth, then to faith, and finally to one unavoidable conclusion: God. So that's it, Doom muttered, kicking an orc into pieces as a preliminary conclusion took shape. It had only been a minute. The first orc's spilled blood still held its warmth. No one in the orc camp was left breathing. 3,000 of them had been cut down. Doom stood on a mountain of corpses in a sea of blood, his blade planted into the earth. Harlan's breathing was calm, far from hurried, though his body was streaked with filthy orc blood that traced the lines of his muscles. He descended from the high ground, saw the pale figures gathering beyond the valley, and shouted, "You're too slow." Chapter 46. In My Way. A company of 100 night watchmen blocked the mouth of the valley. The glow inlaid along their weapons marked them ready for combat. Their orders were simple: clear the orcs from the gorge. "You're too slow." Harlan barked at them from the ridge, then waved his arm to signal that the way was clear and that they should hurry down. At the valley bottom, blood ran in little rivulets and severed limbs lay in piles. The scene stunned the assembled watch. "Champion swordsman! Harlan Ogilvy!" someone cried before the identifier code on his armor even finished its confirmation. Harlan Ogilvy, renowned across the Night Watch, whose reputation as a battlefield duelist and the epitome of individual martial skill preceded him. His personal identification number needed no scanner. Countless soldiers could recite it from memory. The company commander, the carved insignia on his left shoulder, catching the light, pushed forward through his men, clapped Harlan on the shoulder and grinned. "Did you two do this?" he asked, half in question, half in praise. The bodies below were not just a grisly sight. They were the kind of bloody triumph that brought glory and merit to those who stood above them. The company commander had assumed instinctively that it must have been the two of them. The battle report was staggering. Even for the elite Night Watch, the result was almost unbelievable. "Not me." Harlan shook his head quickly, refusing the credit. He kept his voice low. He did it all by himself. The hundreds of Night Watch standing nearby fell silent, all turning to stare at the tall figure in the camp's cleansing pool as he washed blood from his armor. Doom scrubbed the dark, viscous stains from his face and revealed a polite, almost casual smile. "Doom, the third prince!" The company commander's hand flew to his mouth when he saw the blood-streaked rune on Doom's chest. He was about to drop to one knee. No need for formalities. Doom stepped forward, sudden enough to make heads turn, and reached out to steady the trembling commander. "Finish the follow-up work. We'll be leaving first." He was clearly in a hurry for the battlefield command center and had no patience for lengthy post-battle procedures. Without waiting for more ceremony, Doom turned and prepared to go. The worst part of fighting orcs wasn't the thunder of their charges so much as what came after. You had to destroy their genetic material, not just kill them. That meant burning everything with plasma, no half measures allowed. After a few quiet words, he and Harlan swung onto a motorcycle and roared out of the valley. This pack of orcs had been close to their route. Clearing them had been a routine distraction rather than a setback. Doom had run the numbers beforehand and made sure the engagement wouldn't delay their timetable. Watching them go, the company commander glanced down at the temperature readout on his helmet. The blood still smeared across the ridges and plains hadn't cooled to ambient yet. The heat prickled at his scalp. He let out a small laugh. "Looks like the so-called prince really does have talent," he said. The front lines in the orc hunt never stayed put, so the command post didn't either. The Night Watch's trapezoidal war fortress floated on anti-gravity drives, a mobile headquarters that was constantly on the move. Inside, the command room was enormous. A holographic display on the central console recreated every feed within recon range. Temporary commanders manned different sectors, each one routing Night Watch squads and keeping the hunt going without pause. Have the Night Watch finish their current assignments, then hold position. The command cut through the bustling war room like a blade. The voice was so forceful and absolute that conversation died on the spot. Dozens of heads turned toward the doorway, where a young man stood framed in the light, helmet in one hand, armor and face streaked with blood, but bearing a look of fierce, uncanny calm. The sigil on his chest was plain to see. Everyone recognized him. Stories of Doom's exploits had already traveled the front lines and become the stuff of barracks talk. "Your Royal Highness the Third Prince, you must understand." The officer, acting as temporary commander, began, trying to assert protocol. Doom lifted a hand to silence him and nodded to Harlan, who stepped forward. From inside his cloak, Harlan produced the sword seal and held it high for all to see, the tangible proof of authority. "We answer to the warlord," he declared, his voice steady. A hush fell over the room, then one by one the commanders dropped to their knees. In that instant, Doom ceased to be merely the third prince. By King Nowik's command, he was the warlord of multitudes, and no one in the chamber dared to challenge that power. "Do as I said." Doom stood before the central console, expression unreadable as he stared at the images on the screen. His voice left no room for argument. I don't care how much ground we lose, or how many orcs get away to stop the operation. Have the watch finish their assigned tasks, then rest and hold position. I want them rested, then we'll move on my signal. The pressure behind his words was almost physical. The commanders, having received his final orders, were dismissed from their posts to be called on later. Everywhere along the front, the night watch halted. Some slept where they stood, others fell back to the camps for supplies and rest, all waiting for the next command. Normally Doom would take time to explain his reasoning, to win their respect slowly, but after grasping the crucial truth about the City of Truth, he had no patience for gradual persuasion. He was burning to wipe out every last orc and then reinforce his elder brother. He could imagine the crushing weight Ennio carried, standing alone against the pressure of a god, and he wanted to relieve him. "Where is the forging technician?" Doom asked, calling for the one who would put the plans he'd drawn up into motion. "Warlord, what do you need me to do?" A young man stepped out from the shadow of a support beam, several auxiliary mechanical arms fanning out from his back, special lenses flickering over his eyes. He sounded thin with nerves. His extra limbs twitched, one of them idly scratching at the side of his face as if to steady him. "Don't be nervous," Doom said. "Just set the battlefield projection to its simplest mode." The forging technician, one of the specialists who worked in the core furnace deep beneath main defense territory city, looked baffled. He swallowed and stammered. I don't understand what you mean." "What I mean is, the virtual projection doesn't need to display battlefield details," Doom replied. "Strip it down. Give me maximum range. Sacrifice everything superfluous to push the feed as far out as it can go." Doom exhaled, consciously letting go of the imposing bearing that made everyone around him defer. His voice softened but remained firm. "Think of the current projection as a high-budget film. Beautiful, detailed, but short. It renders every texture, every shadow, every individual soldier. That level of fidelity consumes bandwidth and processing power. I don't need a cinema now. I need a scouting lens." The technician's lenses blinked as he tried to reconcile the orders. His mechanical arms adjusted settings with nervous precision. "If I reduce detail, the system will reroute resources to range and refresh rate," he said slowly, catching on to the logic, "but we'll lose identification and close combat clarity." "Exactly," Doom said. "Give me silhouettes, vectors, trajectories. Give me blips and headings. Tell me time of arrival instead of facial features." Fingers and servos moved. A low hum rose as the projection core throttled down its rendering engines and redirected cycles toward long-range sensors. The room's central screen, once layered with hyper-detailed maps, unit overlays, and environmental effects, simplified. Textures vanished, colors fell away. What remained were stark outlines, pulsing nodes, and thin lines of projected motion, stretching the visible theater outward until distant pockets of space and terrain became part of the feed. The technician relaxed a fraction, watching the expanded view with the faint, proud relief of someone who'd executed an exacting modification. Doom leaned forward, eyes narrowed at the now extended horizon. On the new, skeletal display, small formations resolved into a coherent approach vector. "There," Doom said quietly. "Now we can see them. I want simple lines and extreme range. Do you understand?" "Understood." With the warlord's terrifying aura gone, the technician relaxed and immediately grasped what was required. 10 minutes. You'll see what you asked for." The war fortress's reconnaissance systems had a large gap between their upper and lower scan limits. At high resolution, they could only cover about a 100 by 100 kilometer area. That was the practical maximum ever since the loss of the artificial satellites. But if they sacrificed detail, the detection range could be extended by at least 5 times, pushing the scanners until planetary curvature finally put an end to it. The command room fell silent as they waited. Only Doom sat at a table, writing and sketching on a single sheet of paper. Who gave the order? Who told everyone to stop? The voice reached them before the speaker did. If this had been a banquet, her elegant, magnetic heat, almost sensual timbre would have drawn every eye the moment she spoke. Her voice was icily clipped, a controlled edge barely concealing anger. "Have you been fighting greenskins so long you've picked up their stupidity?" Doom knew at once who had spoken. There was only one woman among the Night Watch who spoke like that, Erica von Stern. Her bloodline traced back to the Terra-era Aryans, which had given her a severe, methodical temperament. She wore a specialized stealth blackout suit, far less protective than standard power armor, but fitted with powerful light-bending systems that could render her nearly invisible, designed for covert assassinations. Erica von Stern. Harlan stepped forward, igniting his blade and pressing it threateningly toward her. His rough voice cut through the air. "Watch your tongue. I won't hesitate to use this sword to teach you some manners." At the sight of the champion swordsman, Erica's hard bearing softened. She immediately recognized the identical sigil on his armor and understood the relationship between the two. Insulting his sworn lord, a member of the royal family, in front of his sworn protector meant her rebuke had been mild indeed. The moment she saw the warlord's sword seal, her face changed and she dropped to one knee again. "Warlord, please forgive my outburst. I let my temper get the better of me. I thought the halt at the front was just a dispute between temporary commanders." Doom's expression stayed unreadable. He offered no reply, only glanced at her, then waved her aside. "Heralds, broadcast this document. I want every member of the Watch proficient with it within 2 hours." A herald stepped forward and accepted the handwritten sheet with visible reverence. The page was a tight grid of numbers, a new cipher of numeric commands, each combination mapped to a specific meaning. It was designed for rapid troop direction and even contained detailed codes for individual units. The system wasn't overly complex. For the Night Watch, 2 hours would be enough to reach a working proficiency. 10 minutes later, the central command console came back online, thanks to the forging technician's tweaks. It was performing impressively. Its effective range had increased several-fold, although the terrain rendering had been simplified to basic line work. The simplified map filled the screen with numbers, each digit representing a friendly combat unit, each other number an enemy position. Harlan Ogilvy watched the display intently and murmured, "Let them see what you can do." He wanted his colleagues to witness Doom's extraordinary talent. 2 hours passed in the blink of an eye. Once he was satisfied that the Night Watch had mastered the numerical command system, Harlan transmitted the first order. "All units, attention. Command authority transferred successfully. You will now take orders from the warlord." 47. What is he going to do? Sensors were seated behind the ears. The ancient relic technology translated the wearer's brain activity into control signals and fed them to the central holographic display so the projected images would track the commander's gaze. With a small but crucial modification, those same signals were digitized and beamed directly into the optic feeds of the Night Watch on the front line. When Doom accepted the sword seal in the Royal Council chamber, he had already sketched this war's blueprint in his mind. He was now shaping that plan into reality by methods few could see or understand. Nur's Night Watch had no idea, nor did Nur himself. The Primarch, wrought by the Emperor with the warp and adapted to every manner of warfare, possessed an innate, uncanny comprehension of war when he entered it, an instinct no other being could match. Begin. At the first command, the fortress command room fell eerily silent. The usual crackle and hum of transmission simply vanished. The relic technology took Doom's mental calculations, his objectives and conclusions, and executed them at mind-bending speed. His reactions were measured in nanoseconds, even flirting with picoseconds. The processing power was that of a supercomputer, and the relic translated every decision into digital commands that set the whole war in motion. The battlefield itself stretched nearly 300,000 square kilometers, reduced in the relic's model to a web of unit counts and simplified terrain lines. To the Night Watch, that web, so many variables tangled together, was almost uncontrollable. Across that vast expanse, the orcs were represented by numbers scattered everywhere. The Night Watch's sustained assaults had shattered the orc host. Where once there had been massed ranks, there were now only countless broken bands. Some warbands numbered no more than 3 or 5, others moved in dozens. A handful of squads still held to the hundreds, and some tribes gathered into the thousands, but all were scattered and disorganized. Worse, the orcs were everywhere at once, skittering outward and spreading their genetic material, breeding and seeding new threats. If that could not be stopped in time, even the elite Night Watch risked being dragged into another interminable war of attrition. They were drained from fighting fires on every front. Eventually, the Night Watch found themselves hemmed in by what seemed like an endless tide of orcs. Another siege had begun. Their forces were stretched thin. With fewer than 10,000 fighters left, units were broken down into companies of 100, squads of 10, clusters of 2 or 3, and many lone hunters stalking the no-man's land on their own. As Doom began to seize control of the battlefield, the Night Watch moved in accordance with its digital orders. Even when some instructions seemed pointless, the loyal soldiers obeyed without question, showing up at the specified coordinates at the appointed times. The planning was obsessive. Troop placements were painstakingly exact, supply routes coordinated step by step, and each soldier's stamina tracked and factored into every maneuver. Everything was pushed to the breaking point. The once quiet air of the command room grew stifling. Personnel not assigned to other tasks drifted toward the main console and clustered around the holographic war table, watching numbers and vector lines flicker and reconfigure in a furious dance. "What is he doing?" Erica whispered over the comms, careful not to speak aloud and risk disturbing him. She couldn't follow the fine details of the processing, only that the whole situation was shifting. Harlan, watching and thinking faster than he spoke, answered, "It's a net." His situational awareness and command skills were good, but his real strength was direct combat, so he could only make an educated guess. His intuition told him Doom was using the Night Watch like a fishing net, casting it to trap every fish and shrimp in the water. Doom's face gave nothing away, absolutely impassive, like a cold instrument foe, issuing orders. Thousands of commands flashed through his mind each second and streamed out as digital orders. That wasn't the limit of what he could do. The real constraints were the finite battlefield resources and the restrictions on how units could be deployed and integrated. Even so, the coordination on display left the senior officers in the command room feeling helpless. If a being like this were commanding the enemy, how could anyone hope to beat him? Doom, for his part, was bored. He hadn't even committed his full effort. He'd carved out a portion of his left hemisphere and dedicated it solely to battlefield coordination calculations. Everyone assumed that a commander in a high-intensity engagement had to be single-minded, with all external communications cut off. Doom did the opposite. More often than not, his attention wasn't fixed on the battlefield at all, but on the murmurs of his subordinates on the comm channel. Listening to them talk about him. A fishing net? He thought with a private smile and shook his head. What Harlan saw was only the surface. The deeper dynamics were hard to grasp. You couldn't really blame Harlan. Their bodies and minds ran on entirely different levels. A fishing net has holes. Countless fish would slip through. Doom would not permit a single orc to escape, because that one escape would mean endless trouble later. He preferred a different image. A farmer obsessively tending his own backyard. To him, the orcs were pests that kept crawling up out of the soil, impossible to wipe out completely. Miss one, and they would breed. Miss many, and the fields would be eaten bare. What he was doing now was not casting a net, but plowing and raking the ground, turning every clod, breaking up every lump of earth, flushing out every last pest, and gathering them all together. What is our warlord doing? A night watchman panted the question to his companion as their 10-man squad pressed on. They had been moving non-stop for 4 hours at a brutal 50 kilometers per hour. Along the way, they had cut down several scattered orc bands and skirted larger mobs they easily could have torn apart. "I don't know," his companion gasped, shaking his head, "but shut up and save your breath." Every order from the warlord drove them to the edge of endurance, denying them so much as a moment to rest. Still, the men could feel something else, something changing. The coordination across the battlefield had leapt forward by orders of magnitude. People and machines were never idle. Every gun, every vehicle, every squad was in motion. Each tactical maneuver fed into a single, coherent strategic aim, and when it paid off, the results were nothing short of astonishing. Move 3 kilometers to the right. Engage and eliminate 100 orcs within 1 minute. The captain's voice cut through the noise as a new digital order arrived. He read aloud the translated command, then passed on the next line that came through. Avoid the current route. The Rangers' anti-gravity motorcycles are drawing 1,000-strong orc force across our position. That was the tenor of the battlefield. Commands arriving, routed, and relayed, every second precise and immediate. The Night Watch didn't have to pause and think. When a squad's stamina ran low, a rest order would pop up. When supplies were needed, Rangers on anti-grav bikes would sweep in low, drop packs and munitions, and be gone before anyone could ask questions. No waiting, no debate. Even the heavy war machines got bafflingly exact instructions. Targeting data came down in minutia: which landmark to use as reference, aim at 2 o'clock, raise the barrel by 3 degrees, shift 2 inches to port, load high explosive rounds, fire 5 rounds. Every variable was specified, so there was no room for hesitation, only execution. A few minutes after they finished their maneuvers and moved on, messages of thanks came in from Allied units. In the last engagement, they'd received precise artillery support, shells landing with surgical accuracy, and the results had been unmistakable. That degree of control over the battlefield both astonished and electrified the troops. With command this exact, how could victory be anything but certain? The Night Watch were positively charged. Their orders were simple: focus on the enemy in front of you, wield your blades, and advance on the given deployment markers. They obeyed without hesitation. In the command room, the officers who oversaw the whole operation stood motionless, as if carved from wood. On the sand table before them, the situation unfolded in miniature. Scattered orc bands were driven, baited, and steadily funneled toward a single low plane. 70,000 orcs. Doom stared at the model. The purpose of clearing out the peripheral groups and steering the larger settlements had been obvious all along: to concentrate the enemy into one place. The figure matched their estimates almost exactly. He narrowed his eyes. The first phase of the plan was complete. It was time to begin the next. Champion swordsman, Harlan Ogilvy. After 20 hours of directing the battle without so much as a word, Doom finally spoke. He called for his guard for the first time since the fighting began. "My lord," Harlan answered, dropping to one knee, every inch the loyal retainer, ready to carry out whatever order his master issued. Doom regarded him for a long moment, then said something no one watching would have expected. "In all our past victories you've proven yourself countless times," he said. "You have the title of champion. Now, I want you to lose." Chapter 48. Create a Legend. "My lord, for your victory, for the complete triumph over the Greenskins, I am willing to abandon all my past honors." The rough voice rang out, and the words from Harlan Ogilvy cut through the hush in the command tent. Those present exchanged stunned looks. Harlan's reply had surprised and deeply impressed them all. Harlan was a man for whom honor mattered above almost everything. He clung to slights and victories alike. A loss or gain of honor could fuel a grudge between him and even someone like Shilan for years. On the field, he was a living legend, a champion who had felled enemy generals, taken banners, broken formations, been the first to scale walls, and stood steel to steel against foes. Tales of his deeds echoed across Nur. Even those who had faced him, rival champions included, considered themselves honored rather than shamed to have met him in combat. Orcs, too, grudgingly spoke his name with respect. Now Doom's plan demanded something different. Not Harlan's fame, but the public renunciation of it. The victory over the Greenskins required Harlan to sacrifice everything he had won in the name of honor. It was a hard price, but one that could turn the tide. "Excellent," Doom said, stepping forward. He clasped the champion's shoulder and hauled him to his feet. Doom himself had never been one to place much stock in ceremonial honor, yet he could not help admiring the cost Harlan was willing to pay. Sacrifice is not an obligation. When someone gives themselves for the greater good, those who benefit owe them remembrance. "Let's go, Miss Erica. I'll need your help later." Doom took Harlan by the arm, called back to the still-dazed stealth master, and left the command room, heading for the orc encampment. In the plan's blueprint, Erica was not an optional asset, but a vital one, indispensable to everything that came next. As for running the battle, there was no real danger of losing control. Inside the war fortress's sensor range, communications held steady. From the front line, Doom could still issue precise orders through the transmitter implanted behind his ear. "What do you intend to do?" Erica asked, her expression suddenly modest. Seeing the warlord's near-artful precision left her awed and a little ashamed of her earlier impulsiveness. Had this supremely rational man, with the far-sighted wisdom of a prophet, even calculated that she would have stepped into the command room? The thought made her uneasy. "Do not be alarmed." Doom kept his dignified expression, but his voice softened to calm her panicked heart. "For the sake of victory in this war, I intend to create an orc legend." Doom had spent enough time with the orcs to understand them, and to make some daring conclusions. Orcs carried a collective psychic field. The more of them gathered, and the more they agreed on something, the stronger that field became. Their war machines were the clearest proof. By human standards, the scrap cars orcs put together shouldn't even run, yet under orc control they moved, and the ones painted red ran longer and faster. The main defense territory's underground core furnace and the Forge Academy, institutions that trained and equipped technicians, had confidently set out to study orc machinery, but their efforts produced little. They did, however, uncover a surprising fact. Orcs could fashion weapons of war from anything discarded, even imitating the Night Watch to cobble together crude power armor. There was, however, one thing they couldn't use: null crystal. To an orc, null crystal was nothing more than a worthless rock. Even when they watched humans use it, the orcs never copied them. Null crystals simply did not exist in their understanding. Their peculiar psychic field also couldn't properly channel the null crystal. To an orc, the guard's spears and swords were no better than rusty junk. In Doom's scheme, that psychic field was extremely valuable, so valuable, in fact, that it could be used to eliminate orcs themselves. "Create an orc legend?" Erica murmured, her slender brows knitty, gnawing as she turned Doom's words over in her mind. Suddenly her expression hardened and her voice trembled with barely contained alarm. "What you're planning is too dangerous." "Dangerous?" Doom repeated. "Do you know what this place is? On a battlefield, what isn't dangerous?" His gentle tones snapped sharp, and his eyes cut into Erica's blue ones like a blade. The Primarch's presence pressed down on her. She broke out in a cold sweat. "Our warriors are in danger. To end the war as quickly as possible, I have many options, but this is the fastest," Erica said. "Or do you have a better method, madam?" Doom's voice brightened. He raised a hand and tapped his ear. "I'm all ears." "I don't have your talent." Erica turned her face away, unwilling to meet Doom's gaze. "Then follow my orders. Carry out the tactical plans I give you." Doom stared off into the distance, already folding the details into his mind and preparing the next crucial move. The massive war fortress had shadowed the battlefield and now rested in a low hollow well away from the orcs' gathering, deliberately out of sight and out of range of their attention. Doom climbed a small rise by himself. He didn't need optics. His extraordinary sight took in the scene more than 10 kilometers away. The Rangers' anti-gravity motorcycles had done their job. The orcs were being herded together. The savage horde bellowed and shoved, trampling and fighting one another. Their twisted faces were hateful and ugly. Grotesque mouths opened and closed, revealing rotten, jagged fangs. As Doom had expected, he felt it clearly, the tide of violence coalescing exactly where it needed to. When large numbers of orcs gathered, they naturally began fighting one another. The tribe's psychic field would then crown the single most venerated fighter their leader. Doom smiled faintly. He intended to cut that process off and manufacture a leader on his own terms. As the orcs converged, the Night Watch closed in from all directions. On the warlord's command, a 1,000-strong Night Watch unit launched a surprise attack from the rear, immediately drawing the orcs' attention. The orcs bared their teeth and roared with delight, surging forward as one. The Night Watch formed a shield wall and advanced in disciplined ranks, driving spears forward and slashing with swords to hold back the swarming tide. Blood splattered across shields and ground, which only fed the orcs' frenzy. Their eyes went red, they howled, and they heaved themselves against the Night Watch line. "Rangers, onto the field." Ranger detachments on anti-gravity bikes answered. They dropped protective force fields and spun out their cutting blades, then tore through the battlefield along the lanes the warlord had marked. Time and again they roared past, blades biting through orc formations and carving gaps for the rest of the force to exploit. Long-range fire strike. Shells and plasma slammed down exactly where Doom wanted them. He wasn't trying to butcher the orcs wholesale, just to make enough noise and confusion to throw them off balance. Erica, have your people take the sniper positions. Erica's team melted into their stealth cloaks, slipping into hidden vantage points with long-range rifles. On Doom's signal, the snipers picked off key targets in the scrambling orc crowd. Heavy greenskins dropped after precise headshots. Doom watched the battlefield with a satisfied grin. Everything was unfolding according to plan. Your turn, Harlan. I am Harlan Ogilvy. The megaphone on his motorcycle broadcasts the champion swordsman's challenge across the field. Greenskin cowards, bring your boss out and fight me. A figure in white vaulted off the bike, twin light swords flashing. He charged straight into the heart of the orc ranks, his roar cutting through the battle cries and yanking every pair of eyes toward him. Under Doom's direction, the Night Watch's attack lost momentum and the line began to peel back to the edge of the field. The stage was set. It was time for the protagonist to make his move. There wasn't a say, Ingle orc boss anymore. The position was vacant, but every ambitious orc kid wanted it. Harlan Ogilvy's name had spread among them, a powerful human who'd already slain more than one aspiring leader. A shout tore through the orc ranks. Kill him! Kill him! The kid who kills him will be the boss! Good work, Erica. Doom praised his stealth master. She had slipped into the crowd under her cloak and delivered the rallying cry. For professionally trained assassins and infiltrators, mimicking orc voices and accents was child's play. Hold your positions. Don't finish the job yet. Your mission isn't over. In the center of the clearing, with every eye fixed on them, the duel began. A few of the larger-than-average orc kids stepped forward to challenge Harlan. They formed a spontaneous ring, a swelling, green tide of heads, the greenskins craning forward, hungry to witness who would rise as their new boss. Orcs had no rules in their daily lives, but in battle they were surprisingly disciplined. Harlan, the champion swordsman, lived up to his name. A tall youth charged into the duel ring and didn't last a single round. Harlan's blade found his neck, and the man went down decapitated. Another orc rushed in and dropped the same way. Another followed. For a full 10 minutes, the circle swelled and thinned as green-skinned challengers poured in, and Harlan fought with mounting ferocity. His long swords flashed and danced, cutting down opponent after opponent until the ring fell silent. The orcs' psychic field, meant to embolden them, backfired. Tens of thousands of greenskins felt Harlan's invincibility settle over the crowd, and their courage drained away. Just when it seemed there would be no more challengers, a timid voice piped up from the edge of the ring. I'll challenge you. Author's note, I'm having a rough day, didn't sleep well last night, and the folks next door are tearing up the road and laying pipes, so my head is pounding. I don't dare ask for votes today. Thanks very much to those who sent rewards. 49. The boss is born. Silence had settled over the ring of combatants, but then a small, hesitant voice cut through it. It was thin and unsure, yet in the hush of the dueling circle it carried plainly. The other orcs turned toward the sound and instinctively made room. The speaker was a scrawny, malnourished orc kid. His skin was drawn tight over his bones, his coarse fur matted and greasy. His face hung loose with age and neglect, his teeth deeply cracked, and his limbs were as thin and brittle as dry twigs. He gripped a crude wooden stick like a talisman. Doom had been watching the battlefield for some time and had noticed this oddity in the sea of green. Unlike the brash, aggressive fighters around him, the boy had always been withdrawn, constantly backing away, always looking for a place to hide and survive. Doom had a plan, though, the classic script of the coward who, at a pivotal moment, steps forward, defeats a powerful foe, and is elevated into a hero, the sort of stubborn little legend Doom loved to write for others. The boy himself wore a bewildered expression. He didn't understand why his arm had moved. He hadn't meant to speak, yet the words seemed to issue from him as if drawn out by some force. I want to challenge that human. His wrist felt as if it had been clamped in a pair of pliers and yanked upward. Before he could react, a boot landed hard against his backside and sent him stumbling forward several steps. Instead of running away, You're coming toward me? The human's voice was thick with scorn, but there was interest there too. Under his helmet, Harlan's expression was stone cold. The undefeated champion swordsman stood facing him. For Harlan, his honor could be destroyed right then by an underdeveloped orc. "Orc, what's your name?" Harlan demanded. There was no backing down now. Once he had stepped out, retreat was no longer an option. Like an actor calling for the protagonist, Harlan, cold and theatrical, asked for the name he expected to hear. "Guya, it's Guya," came the shout. Other voices added the taunts. "That snot-nosed brat. Weak-kneed coward who always runs." A few of the orcs in the crowd recognized the scrawny figure. His name was Guya, and among his kin the labels stuck. Snot-nosed brat, weakling, the bottom of the pack. In orc society, being called a snot-nosed brat marked you as the lowest of the low, a symbol of timidity and cowardice. Orcs were a strange people, grown from spores like mushrooms. The first things to sprout were the snot-nosed brats, small and fragile compared with the later, harder warriors. Guya had been born into that first, despised rank, a fact no one in the gathered crowd forgot. Snot-nosed brat isn't just an insult among the orcs, it's practically a species trait. These cowardly scavengers instinctively avoid other intelligent races, skittering around the edges to steal what they can. When orc children come along, the snot-nosed brats latch onto them, clinging to the lowest rung of orc society. Because orcs prize strength and warlike honor, they loathe those little hanger-ons. There is no more contemptuous epithet than snot-nosed brat. Only weak-kneed coward ranks lower. If both labels fit the same orc, you can imagine how utterly doomed he is. The crowd's reaction was merciless. Boos rolled across the arena. When the orc kids learned who Guya was, some even covered their eyes, as if shielding themselves from some moral pollution. They didn't want to see him humiliated. Guya's eyelids drooped. Terror warped his face. He didn't know what was happening. One moment he'd been on the edge, the next he'd inexplicably stepped into the dueling circle. Unseen behind him, Erica had dialed her adaptive camouflage up to full and pressed the precious conversion device clipped to her belt, bringing herself and whatever plan she had into readiness. The Nur crystal kept the dimensional rift propped open, forming a small pocket of space someone could slip into. It lasted only a few seconds, just enough time for a person to enter or leave the crowded orc throng. "Come on, Guya! Fight me to the death!" The shout snapped Guya out of his paralysis. For a moment, he wanted nothing more than to wail and run. He was barely half the height of the human champion. How could his crude wooden club ever pierce that armor? And that glowing weapon the tech boy couldn't even begin to explain, something that was erasing orcs without leaving a trace, made him feel doomed. There was nowhere to go. Still, with thousands of eyes on him, Guya gripped his stick and charged. The other orcs covered their faces in mock disdain, yet peeked between their fingers, hungry to see the coward finally spill blood. Guya's attack was a frantic scramble. No technique, no strategy, just a wild lunge forward with the stick flailing and his eyes shut. Harlan lowered his stance and watched the wild arcs of the wooden club, measuring each trajectory and waiting for the exact moment to strike. He took a steady breath. Then the champion swordsman sprang his blade, fast, barely visible to the greenskins. When the stick struck the critical point, something impossible seemed to happen. The crude wooden weapon had parried the human's supposedly unstoppable, iron-cutting blade. The crowd went silent for a heartbeat, then exploded. Inside the contact, Harlan had perfectly arrested his sword, and with a practiced flex of muscle, made it look as if his blow had been stopped. Basic swordsmanship, deceit masked as defeat. Instantly, the orcs ascribed the moment to their gods. A deafening roar rose up. Wag! Their fury and wonder mingled into a fevered cheer. This was a miracle, they decided. There could be no other explanation but the blessing of Gork and Mork. By Gork and Mork! The crowd roared as a scrawny kid knocked the towering human's blade aside with nothing but a wooden stick. Guya! Guya! Tens of thousands of orc throats bellowed the name in unison, filling the duel ring with thunder. Guya stood there, bewildered by the adulation and by how fragile the giant's sword seemed in his hands. He even wondered, brightly and stupidly, if some hidden talent had suddenly bloomed in him. He scratched his head and smiled like an idiot. Far away, more than 10 kilometers, a figure named Doom smiled as well. He felt the raw, unified energy of the orcs in that cheer, and it fed back, a current of power that reached Guya. The boy felt himself grow steadier, stronger. Cautiously, just as before, Guya stepped forward and swung the wooden stick. Beneath Harlan's helmet, the big man's mouth twitched. Harlan tightened, executed a precise sword technique, met the stick exactly as intended, and still the blade was shoved aside. It happened again. The orcs erupted into hysterical noise. Their twisted faces contorted with ecstasy, hands clawing at their heads as they screamed. Again and again the mismatched pair met, a lumpish, green-skinned child with a stick against a huge, practiced swordsman. Each time, the little orc forced the human's weapon away. Each time the crowd went wilder. Harlan was panting. The endless drills of basic swordsmanship had left his muscles aching and his stamina nearly spent. The orcs read it plainly. The big human was running out of breath and about to fall. "Guya! Guya! Boss! Boss!" they bellowed, shoulder to shoulder, their short, thick legs stamping the earth as they urged their champion on, hungry to see Guya defeat the human and claim the boss's place. Guya, oblivious to any plan, broke into a short run. With a sudden burst of speed, he leapt up and swung his wooden club at the human's head. Behind Harlan's visor, a flicker of contempt showed. This whole charade was degrading. Having to play make-believe with a green-skinned thug was humiliating. He kept his light blade at his head, held with such precise control that the wooden stick seemed to be overpowering it. At the last instant, he threw his weight into the clash. The contact between his helmet and the club rang with a brutal impact. Then, with a forceful push from his legs, he sold the moment, jerking backward as if truly knock, Ed flying, creating the perfect illusion of defeat. From the orc's point of view, it was a thing of wonder. Guya sprang up and brought his staff down with all his weight. The champion swordsman's blade, Harlan's, couldn't take it. The blow cracked against the sword, then found the man's head, and Harlan went flying, slammed hard, and rolled across the earth. The champion swordsman has fallen, but the human cheers turned to frantic cries. Panic spread through their ranks as they resorted to a dirty trick. Erica's specters, her stealth unit, slipped into the arena like shadows, hurling smoke bombs that filled the air with choking cloud and turned everything to confusion. In that cover, Harlan was gone, spirited away while the Night Watch made a rapid, organized retreat. They left the dueling circle to the orcs. They had other priorities now. Guya didn't need them. The orcs swarmed him, hooting and whooping. "Guya! Guya! Boss! Boss!" They tossed him up and caught him, higher and higher, shrieks of laughter filling the clearing. When the humans melted away, none of the orcs pursued. They had already chosen. The smallest among them, gaunt, wiry Guya, who had once been the weakest, had struck down a foe that strong lads had failed to beat. Under the watchful eyes of Gork and Mork, the two gods of their people, the idea of a leader had been born. Each time they flung him into the air, Guya's thin frame seemed to fill out a little more. Muscle seemed to gather where there had been bone, his shoulders broadened, his chest rounded. Before long, he towered beyond what an ordinary orc kid should be. The seed of boss had been planted, and the rest, his size, his strength, his place among them, would follow. Respected warlord, as you predicted, the orcs across the southern hemisphere are being drawn by something. They've altered their routes and are slowly converging on your position. Reports from reconnaissance patrols in every direction poured into the command center. Doom nodded. His suspicions were confirmed. The emergence of an orc boss sends a ripple through the psychic field. Other orcs will sense it and be irresistibly drawn to their new leader. Exactly as Doom had expected. Chapter 50. Let the hunt begin. Instead of wasting time and scattering their limited troops across the countryside, chasing orcs that erupted in wave after wave and then vanished, it was smarter to do the opposite. Encourage the rise of an orc boss, and let the rest of the horde, driven by instinct, converge on a single point. It was a primitive urge, written into their DNA, muddled and irresistible, but capable of enormous consequence when manipulated. Doom had used his knowledge of orc behavior to craft a step-by-step plan, turning the enemy's racial traits into precise tools. "Are you going to give me an explanation?" The resentful voice came from behind. Doom checked the smile, threatening to break his face, forcing himself into a deadpan expression. He'd seen Harlan's theatrics before. Still, the image of Harlan toppled by a wooden stick brought him a private, guilty pleasure. Harlan had staged a perfect escape under the cover of the specters and stormed back now, crimson-faced and furious. "Orcs are phototactic," Doom said bluntly. The abruptness of that first sentence made Harlan frown. He didn't understand at once. Doom waved Harlan over, and the two of them, master and servant, sat together on the mountainside under a summer sky. A warm breeze moved through the grass, carrying, oddly enough, the tang of gunpowder from the valley below. "At night they wander, looking for any little light," Doom said quietly. "I built them a lighthouse," he added, pointing into the dark. Far off, the orcs were still cheering, voices rolling up the slope in a single guttural chant. "Gork and Mork." "It'll draw the lost ones toward that beacon," Doom explained. "That's too dangerous," Harlan said. He was beginning to understand the idea. It was far easier to lure orcs in than to hunt them down, but it was a gamble. He could still see, in his mind's eye, the 6-meter-tall orc boss from a year ago. Its presence had been like a black mountain. If Doom hadn't come down from the sky and torn it apart, Harlan knew he would not have survived a one-on-one fight with that berserker. Doom met his look. "I know it's dangerous," he said, "but I have my reasons for helping Guya rise to boss." He paused, then added, blunt as ever, "Orcs are naturally belligerent." "Without human interference," Doom said, "as time goes on and their numbers swell, a boss will eventually rise on their own, through violence and cunning." "Harlan," he went on, "do you think a boss forged by brutal competition is more dangerous, or the Guya we just saw?" Harlan said nothing at first. He watched the celebrating orcs for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Doom's plan was starting to make sense to him. The sting of today's humiliation still nagged at him. "Did it have to be me?" he asked. Doom's answer was blunt. "Yes, it had to be you. Your reputation makes you the perfect figure for them to rally around." He spoke seriously. Making Harlan the defeated totem wasn't a whim, but a deliberate choice. From memories he'd recovered by consuming orc brain tissue and from the echoes embedded in the blood the orcs had drunk in battle, Doom knew Harlan's name and deeds had left a deep impression on them. "Come on, it's over there." He beckoned Harlan to follow. The cheering died away as a group of orc kids hauled Guya up onto a makeshift garbage throne. The sight cemented him as the new boss. They watched him with something like worship as he returned to the command center. An old Terra proverb came to mind: "Win the war inside the tent, and you'll win it 1,000 miles away." It was praise and a warning both. They judged him nearly perfect. 8 parts right, 2 parts missing. Word had come in that the orcs were gathering. The seasoned commanders understood immediately. The scattered warbands would coalesce on their own, like beans poured into a bowl. The Night Watch's job was simple and brutal. Shape the battlefield, funnel the enemy, pin the orc boss in place, and let the waves of attackers deliver themselves. Surrounded by those reverent faces, Doom felt thrilled. He weight on his shoulders grow heavier. Expectations tightened around him. He stepped up to the command console and, with calm hands, drew a circle on the virtual sandbox. "Order the Night Watch to build a fortress," he said. "We will control the battlefield within an area of 10,000 square kilometers. No mistakes." "Understood," the command center answered as one. Fists struck chests in a warrior's salute, voices ringing with commitment. "Let the hunt begin." After a short rest, the Night Watch went to work. They used their weapons to hew stone and raise stout fortifications, a grinding war of attrition to pin the orcs down. The warlord's command was blunt and absolute: hold the orc boss in its graveyard. Under no circumstances was it to be allowed to leave. The orcs answered in kind. Seeing the humans building walls, they felled trees and stacked earth and rock, throwing up a stronghold of their own. It had to honor Gork and Mork, and, in true orc fashion, it had to be bigger and noisier than anything the humans put up. Doom watched the edifice climb from the ground, a savage, roaring orc face carved at its heart, and felt the last of his worry ease away. If this had been a normal orc boss, it would already have been forcing its way out now, reassembling its mobs, exploiting the orcs' furious breeding to drag humanity into a grinding, endless war. By erecting a castle, Guya had, in fact, sealed his own doom. All units, relinquish non-crystal weapons. seal and store them for future use. It was a simple order, and everyone knew exactly what it meant. The Night Watch understood orcs' strengths. Except for crystal-based constructs, they could quickly copy technology and then overwhelm opponents with sheer numbers. Doom understood something else just as clearly. The larger the orc host, the more bright sparks would emerge among them, cunning tinkerers, field engineers, and leaders who could turn quantity into dangerous quality. So once everything was prepared, Doom settled into a slow, grinding war of attrition. Under his orders, the Rangers trailed the migrating orcs in secret. They did not so much oppose them as shepherd them, guiding their columns along routes Doom had prepared and making sure the orcs encountered no unplanned obstacles. When a column had passed, the Forging Academy of the Core Forge moved in to clean up the aftermath. Their team swept the ground with scientific instruments to detect abnormal activity, dug up developing orc broods buried below the surface, and then incinerated the trails with concentrated plasma fire so nothing of the passage remained. That destruction was not a one-time sweep. At the warlord's command, the scorched paths were inspected repeatedly, and where necessary, burned again until there was no chance of survivors or regrowth. The Academy's aim was absolute. Not a single orc missed, and no telltale green mushrooms ever allowed to sprout again. Bit by bit, with Doom's precise direction and this relentless follow-up, the principal battleground shifted in their favor. What had begun as attrition became a strategic victory, achieved one careful, deadly step at a time. Whenever large orc warbands tried to cross into the designated combat zone, the Night Watch met them head-on. By cutting off and annihilating incoming reinforcements, they steadily bled the enemy's effective strength. But if Guya himself rode out with a relief force, the Night Watch, in spite of those victories, would break at the sight of him. Their panicked retreats only spread stories of his ferocity and inflated his reputation. Behind the scenes, the specters worked in the shadows, picking off rival orcs so no one could challenge Guya's position. On the surface, the fighting had a simple rhythm. The orcs launched assaults on the castle, and the humans dug in. Whenever the orcs tried to fall back, the defenders harried them and drove them back into the stronghold. It became a constant give and take. When the enemy advanced, we yielded. When they withdrew, we pressed forward. The orcs loved it. Day after day they fought beneath Guya's banner, shouting praise to Gork and Mork. Guya brought home countless victories, and the lesser fighters, the shrimps, were terrified of him. Still, all that bravado changed nothing. However fiercely the orcs fought, they never managed to push past the boundaries of the war zone. Reinforcements kept arriving every day, but the orc population never climbed above 50,000. Guya himself stayed locked at 4 meters tall. He couldn't grow another inch. The strange war of attrition dragged on for 6 months, and then, finally, the reinforcements stopped coming from beyond the wilderness. Inside the stronghold, the fighting-mad orcs who had once reveled in battle were beginning to show the strain. The orc kids clustered around Guya were cycled in and out until there were always different faces at his side. Instead of getting sharper and tougher from combat, those kids only grew weaker and more broken. After half a year as boss, helped by the power of the Wag field, something changed in Guya. His frail body was superseded by a stronger one, and a bit of clarity came with it. Looking over the exhausted, depleted ranks, he understood what had happened. He had been set up, and the whole orc race had been used as bait. My lord, as you ordered, every route the orcs could have taken has been thoroughly checked. Except for your current location, the forging master added, leaning forward. I swear on the honor of the Core Forge, there are no other orcs or orc spores anywhere in Nur. They were in the command center. The forging master, dressed in a technician's robe with several auxiliary arms and tools arrayed before him, relayed the news with practiced humility. Reports and confirmations arrived in quick succession, each one better than the last. The Night Watch thanks you for your efforts, someone said. The Core Forge hums because of you. Doom nodded and thanked them in turn. The forging master and his apprentices had worked day and night, sweeping away the last traces of the orc menace. Their sacrifice earned the Night Watch's gratitude. Is this the final battle? Harlan asked, voice bright with excitement. In just half a year, his master had become a beacon drawing the orcs in and annihilating them, achieving in months what King Nawick had failed to do. During the standoff with the orcs, Harlan felt elated. Seeing his Night Watch comrades scattered and hunted under Guya's tyranny had wound him tight. Now, watching the tide turn, he felt something loosen inside him. He knew much of it had been theater, an exaggerated display, but the relief was real. After all, who among them didn't play a part? Let the warriors rest. At first light tomorrow we strike, and we will drive the orcs from Nur once and for all. Author's note: I know everyone has their own way of reading novels, and I respect that. Please, no cursing. Warlord, the orcs have fallen back into Junk City under our siege. They're caged, like a flock of lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They can't break us. No rush. The answer to Harlan came in a voice loud and deep, full of suppressed power and an authority that made people instinctively trust it, made them want to kneel. A giant stood before Harlan, fully 4 meters tall, broad and solid enough that the spacious command hall suddenly seemed a little cramped. In 6 months, Doom had grown noticeably taller, noticeably stronger. The casual aura he wore was enough to make any mortal bow. He loomed over the holographic map, holding a long staff and continually tapping and pointing at the shifting markers. There are too many stories of victory lost at the last. Stightwatch's goal is not a massacre. Our true victory is making sure not a single orc slips past the blockade, and that there are no more problems afterward. Under Doom's exacting direction, the Night Watch fractured into dozens of action teams, each executing its orders with ruthless precision. 9,000 watchmen had encircled and slaughtered roughly 50,000 remaining orcs. Victory was finally in sight. Had those 9,000 simply charged on instinct, the orcs would have been overwhelmed, but Doom remained stern and deliberate. He would not allow a single orc to escape, not after the city's siege. That disaster still haunted the Night Watch, a dark stain on an otherwise proud record. For that reason, Doom had abandoned most written, numbered orders. Over the past 6 months, his messengers had learned to keep pace with him, taking down commands delivered at breathless speed. The man himself looked almost godlike, towering and severe, his long staff stabbing precisely at the holographic map as he routed unit after unit across the display. Even so, Doom's rapid-fire voice left the messengers gasping. They bent under the tempo of his commands, sweat beading on their brows as they scrambled to carry out his will. The warlord's command was unnervingly precise, down to the level of a single man, a single rifle, a single sword, and he even factored in the physical condition of each fighter. In the command hall, no one argued. Orders were passed along in silence, and the troops shifted as if guided by a single mind. Outside, the Night Watch tightened its ring around the orc stronghold, methodically squeezing the defenders. Their assaults were blunt and relentless, like a dull blade pressed through flesh, alternating strikes that slowly, inexorably wore down the orc's patience and strength. Harlan, come, let's go say goodbye to our old friend. After this fight, there'll be no more orcs on Nur. Doom flashed a broad, almost boyish smile, an open invitation to see the campaign through. For the past 6 months, he had been at the front more often than not, frequently locking horns with Guya in the heat of battle. All those skirmishes, all the blood and strategy, were meant to culminate here. This would be the decisive clash that settled the grievances between the sides once and for all. It was time to put an end to the war and bid the orcs a final farewell. It's time to say goodbye. Harlan's scar twitched as a crooked smile spread across his face. Guya's probably been dying to devour you. He's missed me, Doom replied coolly. He held out his left hand, while 2 warriors fastened arm guards onto his forearms. He couldn't help thinking of the orc boss he'd once helped rise to power. Then, to the champion swordsman he called, "Let's end this, finish the final battle, and bid an old friend farewell. Come out! Face me!" A thunderous roar cut across the sky. On the walls of the orc junk city, the 4-meter-tall Guya reared up on the battlements and bellowed, "Doom!" The orc boss responded with a furious, desperate roar, issuing a challenge to the human leader. After a long struggle and countless clashes, the orc boss had come to dominate his people, and a powerful champion had likewise arisen among the humans. The orcs had been taught to believe that their leader was invincible, that only the orc boss could stand against him. The truth, however, was starkly different. Doom could have killed Guya without breaking a sweat. Though their sizes were comparable, the gap in actual combat power between them was enormous. Guya's eyes were blood red. His lower jaw jutted forward grotesquely, a gaping maw topped by a huge fang at the left corner of his lip, the skin around it scored with coarse vertical scars. The right fang had been shattered by a punch from Doom in an earlier encounter, a humiliation he had sworn to avenge. "I know you're watching me," he bellowed, hefting a makeshift giant axe in one hand and pointing it toward the human war fortress. Memories flashed through him, and his eyes widened as he roared again. "You got what you wanted. The orcs are finally exhausted because of you." He wore a tatters-ridden vermilion suit of power armor, shame burning beneath it like molten rock. That big human could have killed him countless times, but had let him live, deceiving the younger orcs and turning Guya into a puppet leader. Today, the blood-red light in his eyes softened into something like relief. He would finally rid himself of that cunning, cruel human, return to his Gaumaurgi, Mork and Gork, and end his life of humiliation once and for all. All around him, the orcs rose up. Their coarse roars rolled across the plain like distant thunder, wild howls echoed between the hills, and furious cries exploded in the ears of every orc and human. The battlefield fell silent at his roar. Soldiers on both sides turned and followed his gaze to the fortress walls, where a single man stood on the ramparts like a statue. Clad like a gladiator with the haft of an axe resting on his shoulder, he faced Guya across the field. Sunlight washed his shoulders, giving him a godlike silhouette. When the two titans' eyes met, the air seemed to twist between them, tiny sparks of energy crackling in the void. "Doom, Doom," the Night Watch chanted, his name a rallying cry. The warlord was the symbol of invincibility. "Guya," Doom bellowed back at the orc boss, then launched himself from the battlements, diving dozens of meters down. His massive body struck the ground with a thunderous impact. Dust billowed up, and when it cleared, a figure stood calmly in the center. Doom grinned, battle lust flooding him. Nearby, Harlan quietly shook his head and switched his power armor into protective mode. He did not possess Doom's raw, overwhelming power. Encased in the suit, he followed, leaping from the wall after the warlord. Doom pressed a mechanism on the axe's handle. The weapon flashed, and two flat blades of light sprang from its tip. The wide, crescent-shaped blades were sky blue, their surfaces etched with cuneiform-like glyphs, arranged in intricate patterns that spoke of courage and glory. It was the proud work of a Nur master craftsman. By carving those characters into raw null crystal, the crystal could project them onto blades of pure light. Opposite him, Harlan held a spear horizontally in one hand, while lowering a light sword to the ground with the other. The cape attached to his power armor billowed as if a wind had passed through the field, making him look completely awe-inspiring. A subtle shift ran through the battlefield. The two strongest warriors had locked eyes, each preparing for an honorable duel. The orcs could not help but stare. Worship of strength was in their blood. Guya felt Doom's aura wash over him, a presence so powerful it seemed like an immovable mountain. His breath quickened. Doom was taller and broader than he remembered. Although the two were about the same height, the raw power radiating from that massive figure sent a chill through the orc boss. He had never felt anything like it, terrifyingly strong. "Face me, Doom." Guya leapt down and clambered onto a battered armored vehicle. His coarse roar shook the air as he summoned every scrap of courage. He tightened his grip on his great axe, seeking the cold steel's small comfort. His whole Odie trembled, but he forced the words out in a bitter, defiant shout. "I finally dare to face you. I won't run anymore. Night Watch, execute the plan." Doom's command crashed down like thunder, obliterating Guya's defiant cry without a flicker of regard. At the warlord's order, the Night Watch surged forward, their voices full of the single-minded hunger to wipe away humiliation and claim revenge. "The Day of Atonement has come. We will have our revenge." They roared in answer. From behind the mountains, the war fortress that had been concealed began to reveal itself. A dark, trapezoidal structure slid into view, its surfaces shining like polished obsidian. The fortress loomed solemn and imperious, and its huge, gaping muzzles, like the mouths of some mechanical beast, radiated a bone-deep chill. The war fortress's giant plasma cannons finished charging, and several searing, deep blue bolts tore across the sky, slamming into the gates of the Orc junk city. Sizzle! There was no thunderous explosion. The bolts behaved like superheated iron spheres, sinking into the gate as if into butter, melting, vaporizing anything in their path. The gates collapsed with a crash. The enormous Orc head sculpture of Gao Maor Gay, Morkan Gork, was riddled with holes, and the entire city wall exploded into fragments. The plasma's heat set every combustible alight. In seconds, the city was an inferno, black smoke boiling up into the sky. Guya didn't register any of it. His mind held only one target. He wanted a final fight to atone for his humiliation. The garbage truck rattled and groaned as he slammed down the hatch. Flanked by his bodyguards, he screamed and charged straight toward the unhurried figure of Doom. The personal guards came barreling forward on junk motorcycles, wearing crude power armor driven by pistons and hydraulics. Their grotesque faces were twisted with excitement, tongues lolling and spittle flying. Doom's eyes flashed with contempt. He lifted his battle axe, its blade wreathed in a humming containment field, and brought it down. Chapter 52, Sudden Change. At the center of the battlefield, the commanders of both sides faced one another, generals who each led tens of thousands, yet the fate of the fight would be decided by steel between them. Doom moved with a speed that no one present, human or beast, not even the Orc boss, could track. Still, there was no need to show off that kind of power. Battles were as much about psychology as about physical force. Letting the Orcs charge again and again, and allowing other Orcs to see their comrades cut down, was a far more effective deterrent than slaughtering them all at once. If Doom had unleashed his full strength, the Horde would have been left staring at a field of corpses without understanding what had happened, an outcome that might only have stoked their fury and sent them screaming forward. Restraint was a tactic. Sometimes holding back and striking precisely produced twice the effect for half the effort. Automatic rifle fire spat in from a distance. Doom hefted his war axe, and the dimensional blade met the incoming bullets. The dimensional rift would send any object it struck hurtling into an unknown world. The Orc Kid's automatic fire posed no real threat to Doom, even if he never bothered to intercept it. His thick, resilient skin shrugged off medium to large caliber rounds, producing only pain rather than injury. Realizing bullets were useless, the Orc Kids pulled their ramshackle motorcycles in close, revving and charging. They hoped to use the bike's momentum and the spikes they'd bolted on to smash him and fling the big human aside. Doom remained unhurried. He calculated the approach angles of each bike as they came in, then let the first one commit to a head-on strike. At the last instant, he shifted sideways, slipping past the collision with effortless grace. The motorcycle thundered past, and Doom's war axe descended into the terrified rider's eyes. The weapon wasn't sharp in any ordinary sense. The dimensional blade had no thickness, a two-dimensional edge that didn't cut matter itself, but severed the dimension it passed through. Almost nothing physical could block it. Where it struck, it carved a perfectly straight line through reality. Nothing, not armor, skin, flesh, or bone, could stop the dimension-rending slash. With a single swing of his axe, Doom cut a smooth, mirror-bright diagonal through the Orc rider and his steel mount as if they offered no resistance. Any scream that should have come was choked off and lost beneath the roar of explosions. Doom's face never changed. He seemed to register every incoming bullet, and with unnerving calm, he walked through the hail of gunfire toward Guya's junk car, swinging the axe again and again, left and right, bisecting anything in his path. Harlan fought in a different register. His spear and sword met the enemy with brutal, precise violence. The spear found the junk car driver and pinned him, and with a single, graceful turn, his longsword sliced the Orc and the car it rode clean in two. Harlan, a champion swordsman, displayed extraordinary blade work, unleashing lethal moves with effortless ease. He didn't strike the theatrical poses of a famous master, but he had learned the sword's true essence. The ramshackle Orc motorcycles hurtled at the pair like moths to a flame, only to erupt into balls of fire as they neared, incinerating their riders to ash. Doom! Guya howled. Grief and fury tore through him. He watched his men fall, one after another, under Doom's blade, and whatever caution had once kept him alive vanished. As a youngster, he'd earned the reputation of a coward, a squealing, frightened brat who clung to his life. Now, seeing his subordinates die bravely for him, something inside snapped. Rage flooded his crimson eyes. He bellowed, ready to tear that human apart. 4 meters tall and built like a living tank, Guya vaulted off the wrecked bike. Each movement showed terrifying strength as he planted both feet and held his enormous axe horizontally before him, charging with a furious roar. Doom stood amid the cairn, age drenched in orc blood. His expression turned icier still, a cold sneer curling at the corner of his mouth. Doom curled a finger, and with a voice full of contempt that sent a chill through the air, said, "Come and die!" "Whack!" Guya screamed, on the edge of madness. His eyes burned red, muscles bulging, veins snaking like coiling dragons. "This ends between you and me." In Doom's eyes, Guya's reckless posture finally carried the faintest hint of a boss aura. Just a trace, nothing more. Guya's steps came like muffled thunder. His thick calves drove him forward, and his green body launched into the air. He rode the momentum of his charge, bringing his war axe up with both hands. Speed and raw strength combined in a vicious leaping cleave aimed to split Doom in two. Instead of backing away, Doom met him head-on. He tightened every muscle, then detonated forward, accelerating so fast the air roared, a sonic shockwave blooming around him. Before the boom could fully crack, Doom shot up from the ground like a meteor and slammed into Guya mid-leap. The impact detonated with a muted boom that rolled across the battlefield and drew every eye, a heavy, bone-deep thud that echoed as the two titans collided. A shockwave rippled across the air, visible to the naked eye. The duel had ended in a single lightning-quick instant. A green figure was hurled backward, collapsing in a ruinous heap. The sight was unbearable. Guya fell like a torn sack, his body broken and useless. The orc's courage collapsed with him. "Look, the warlord has beaten the orc boss. It's over," someone shouted, and the cry swept through the Night Watch like wildfire. The men of the Night Watch stood stunned, as if watching an old tale come alive, human heroes felling a demon god. The exhilaration that flooded them was almost a physical thing. Inside the stronghold, orcs panicked. A gap had been ripped in their defenses, and the Night Watch poured into the city. Guya lay in a spreading pool of blood. His skin leaked dark, glistening streams. Bones were splintered, tissue torn, and mashed by the force of the strike. He coughed, each breath ragged and uneven, his chest heaving as if it might collapse. The frenzy that had driven him seconds before had vanished. Now he was little more than a broken animal, eyes glazed but locked on the human who had felled him. That human still stood, covered in blood but unmarked. Not a single wound marred him. The only proof they had even struck each other was the shattered left pauldron lying on the ground. Guya's whisper, "Why are you so strong? Why?" trembled with bitter disbelief. He had lost again, utterly defeated. Shattered organs and foamy blood kept spilling from his mouth. The impact had ripped the earth open into a semicircular crater. Doom stood unmoving in its center. His left shoulder guard was gone, but the skin beneath it was untouched. The toughness of his flesh and blood outmatched steel. He stood like an unyielding monolith. Guya had always known there was a gulf between them. It had never been an even fight, but he had not expected this. In their first true clash, he had been mercilessly crushed. No living thing should have walked away from that collision intact, and yet Doom simply stood there, as steady as ever. Doom said nothing. He stepped forward and looked down at the orc boss who had stood by Guya for so long. His body felt like a cracked porcelain bowl, every bone splintered beneath the surface. Doom planted his boot on the orc boss's chest. The leather pressed against a frantic, uneven heartbeat. There was no mistaking it. Guya was dying. "Take my head," Guya rasped, the pressure on his chest crushing his breath. He wanted only a quick end, a release from a lifetime of shame, so he could return to the side of Gork and Mork. "I don't plan to kill you just yet," Doom said, shaking his head, a cold smile seeping across his blood-streaked face. "But when you fall, the rest of the orcs will scatter." At this critical moment, he could not allow the tide of battle to turn. "Doom, gee, you ower," he laughed, a bitter, broken sound. His voice came out rough and wheezy as he looked up at the enemy leader who stood over him. He was a warrior born to command, a machine of war who had always measured things with cold logic. You are truly powerful. Not only do you have the strength to crush us, you know how to hold it back. To have been toyed with by you for half a year, I count it an honor." The words brought him a sudden disorienting relief. His defeat, he realized, had not been for lack of skill. Against an opponent like that, even if some other orc had been the boss, the details might have changed, but the result would have been the same. He shut his eyes and refused to look at the hunting orcs. He would wait quietly until the last one fell, and then he would die, returning to the embrace of Gork and Mork. "Are you all right?" Champion swordsman Harlan burst through, his power armor spattered with orc blood. He was breathless, staring between the blood-soaked Doom and the fallen, eyes-closed Guya. The impact of the fight had been terrifying. Seeing Doom coated in gore made him worry. Guarding the warlord was his duty. He knew Doom's strength, but duty could not be set aside because of assumptions. "I'm fine," Doom said with a smile. "He couldn't have hurt me. Not even 10 more of them could." Harlan studied Doom closely, scanning for cuts or suspicious bruises. Only when he found no injuries did he visibly relax. He had swept away Guya's personal guards thoroughly. There were no lurking threats left. Harlan watched Guya with keen interest. If he could exploit Guya's honor as a stepping stone, he might yet crown himself leader of the orcs. An idea formed in his eyes. He cut a length of steel from a junk car, lashed it to Guya with chains and cable, then signaled Doom. Together, they hauled him upright and drove the jagged metal into the ground to pin him in place. "Orcs, look here!" Harlan bellowed across the junk city, parading the captive as proof. He meant to crush their morale and wash away the humiliation of that debacle 6 months ago. Sure enough, the orcs fighting among the shattered walls and ruins, the ones still resisting the night watch, caught sight of the spectacle and lost their nerve. Panic spread through them like wildfire. This is exhilarating," Harlan crowed, gloating. Before he could finish, Doom suddenly stiffened. He stepped forward, placing himself between Harlan and whatever lay beyond the battlefield, and peered toward the distant rolling hills. Something out there was gathering strength. Doom felt it as a disturbance in his mind. A cold, sinister pressure that made his hair stand on end. Psionic energy, 53. Ancient orcs. Psionic fluctuations detected. All units, attention. Harlan barked into the comms, his voice sharp with urgency as he warned the Night Watch of an unexpected development on the battlefield. The champion swordsman reacted instantly. Readouts from his power armor's external temperature sensors flashed a warning. The air temperature was plummeting. Around them, the sun had only just risen, and plasma streams and high-energy beams still lanced the sky. But the sudden, biting cold stood out, a sure sign that something supernatural was forming. Psionics. Strange and variable, but not without traces. Whenever psionic power is applied, it drags heat away. Water molecules in the air begin to freeze, producing a rapid, localized drop in temperature. Beneath Doom and Harlan, orc blood had already solidified into jagged crimson ice crystals, freezing in seconds. It was an unmistakable precursor. A psionic strike was imminent. The Night Watch responded even faster. They braced for an incoming psionic strike of uncertain origin. Power armor systems whined to life as they routed maximum output to their personal force shields, preparing to absorb whatever mental assault was coming. A pulse of current ran through the Nur crystal built into the suit. The crystal's lattice responded, projecting a small dimensional field that bloomed outward and wrapped the armor in a protective shell. The Nur crystal was a curious thing, used everywhere, its provenance a mystery, clearly not a natural mineral. The Night Watch and the ancient ancestors had learned how to manufacture and deploy it, but never fully understood its inner mechanics. When several Nur crystals were linked, they produced a composite force field, an egg-shaped barrier that enclosed the whole body. By chance, that configuration proved unusually effective against psionic attacks. Within seconds, the Night Watch had powered up those defenses and tightened their ranks as the battlefield shifted. Doom stepped in front of Harlan, shielding him with his bulk. He steepled his fingers briefly and, with a curt, silent gesture, signaled his guards to fall back at once. Through his enhanced vision, Doom spotted a hunched figure in a sackcloth robe on a small rise about 5 kilometers away. The man chanted without pause, his wide sleeves sweeping the air as he traced strange psionic sigils. The symbols hovered like restless spirits, their edges flickering with pinpricks of light, beautiful to look at, yet quietly coalescing enormous power. The target of that power was unmistakable. This position, exactly where they stood. Doom's face was as calm and still as dead water, but he felt a sharp, private loathing for the turn of events. As a warlord and commander of the Night Watch, he hated surprises. Battle, to him, should be readable and controllable, every movement tracked, every loss preventable. An outside disruption was a true wild card, the kind of unpredictable intrusion that could ruin even the best-laid plans, like two fighters grappling when a third suddenly leaps into the fray. Doom was used to holding everything in his hands, to eliminating surprises and keeping his carefully chosen Night Watch from dying in unforeseen circumstances. Now, seeing that gathering psionic power, he urgently signaled Harlan to withdraw. This was a force he could not face head-on. Doom lowered his stance slowly, bracing himself to take the psionic strike head-on. He could have dodged, he could even have closed the distance and counterattacked the unknown caster, but he didn't. The chant bleeding from the stranger's lips was old and uncanny, and the air itself was growing colder by the second. Whatever was coming at them wasn't ordinary sorcery, it was a focused psionic blast. If Doom sidestepped it, the attack would simply shift its aim, and the Night Watchmen, scattered on the field, wouldn't have time or space to get out of the way. Hell, the city of truth. Only those fanatics would throw psionics around like this, Harlan muttered, but his feet were honest. He slid away from the center of the impending impact without hesitation. Standing his ground when Doom might fail would be pointless. If Doom couldn't take it, staying close would only get more people killed. By pulling back, Harlan gave the one capable of absorbing the blow room to do so, and the freedom to fight without worrying about collateral damage. Around them, the Night Watch moved with disciplined efficiency, each member running their assigned sector, carrying out orders, and finishing their tasks in a steady, practiced rhythm. Despite the chill that seeped into their bones and the eerie chant that filled the air, the unit held its formation and did what it had to do. Compared with Doom, the Night Watch were far more focused on the present. The great swords and axes in the hands of the orc kids and the bullets from their crude firearms posed a more immediate danger than a single psionic strike. If the warlord couldn't hold on and fell, the Night Watch would learn from it, investigate thoroughly, and take revenge. Bound by the laws of war and trained to be professional, the Night Watch were nothing if not instruments of violence, cold, efficient, and deadly. They did not grieve or rage. They suppressed emotion with clinical detachment and concentrated only on winning. These were Nur's most powerful soldiers. A brilliant streak of light cut across the sky as a high-velocity projectile tore through the air, leaving a deep blue trail that snapped with electric sparks. From a shadowed perch, a phantom of a shooter had fired, an electromagnetic sniper round hunting its target. On Nur, physical weapons were rare treasures. Apart from crystals, mineral resources were extremely scarce. Bullets embedded with virus sacs were rare and valuable. Nur could no longer make them. They were reserved for only the highest value targets. The phantom who fired from the shadows clearly considered a master of psionics to be exactly that. These hypersonic rounds carried enough kinetic energy to punch through armor. On impact, the toxin sac inside the bullet would rupture, and the virus would be introduced instantly into the wound, poisoning whoever was hit. In an earlier age, such specialized bullets had been used for hunting. The toxin allowed hunters to fell large beasts without damaging their hides, preserving them intact. This was a perfectly timed sniper shot. To avoid it, the psionic would have to break his concentration and abandon his spell, an action that would render all his work pointless. To keep the spell meant taking the shot head-on. The hypersonic projectile arrived in the blink of an eye. Through the phantom's scope, he watched the tracer streak and then the impact. Direct, clean. The mysterious figure's body did not move. Instead, the very space around him seemed to shiver and distort, like water disturbed by a falling stone, ripples radiating outward. The supersonic round hung frozen in midair, suspended at the heart of a ring of ripples, rendered harmless. Sniper failed. Target has a personal shield, Initially identified as a psionic shield, the Phantom reported from the shadows, voice low and clipped. Doom didn't flinch. Neither did the Phantom who had taken the shot. There was no surprise, no disappointment. Whoever had fired, clearly a master of psionics, had stepped into the open despite the Night Watch's fearsome reputation. That meant he had to be prepared. The Phantom's reasoning for pulling the trigger had been simple: take the chance in case the target was a novice. This was how the battlefield worked. Both sides paid for every test, always probing for an opening. The air continued to chill. The muddy center of the field, already dark with blood, iced over with a thin white frost in seconds. The steady drop in temperature spoke to the sheer intensity of the psionic strike. Doom closed his jaw and focused, every muscle tensing for what came next. He was sure he could withstand the psionic blow. His body's instincts had never steered him wrong. Boom! The chant finished. The mysterious figure swept a long sleeve aside, and with a thundero, a cyan bolt of psionic lightning plummeted from the sky. Doom's eyes shot up. His lightning-fast reflexes had already locked onto the strike's origin before the thunder even rolled. The bolt carried raw, furious power, twisting down like a silver snake flicking its tongue. Not good. He realized, too late, that while his instincts were true, his body could have taken the strike without harm. His assumption had been wrong. The lightning wasn't meant for him at all, but for Guya, who hung above, incapacitated and helpless. The cyan bolt slammed into the ground, and electric arcs leapt and danced, sizzling as they tore through the air. Doom could tell at once that the cyan lightning wasn't destructive. It carried a pulse of life, like spring thunder that wakes the earth, meant to stir something back to strength. The mysterious figure's intent was obvious. He wanted to revive Guya, to force the orc leader back to his feet and make him fight. Why he wanted that, simply to watch a beast struggle, left Doom uneasy. He turned to look back, full of doubt. Just as the stranger finished his incantation, the man gave a single wave and vanished like a wisp of smoke. The cyan lightning struck. In a blinding flare, the sudden change in temperature melted the ice crystals and the frozen blood, sending up a thick, crimson steam. Sounds rose from the haze. Doom drew closer and listened. The sharp cracking of dislocated joints, the tearing and stretching of muscles, the hiss and pop of blood vessels bursting into life. Then came the opposite noises, the grinding and knitting of bone, the suturing of torn flesh, and beneath it all a stronger, hotter rush of blood. He he he! A cruel laugh rolled out of the crackling storm, and Guya's rough, familiar voice returned. Only now it carried something different. You never would have guessed, Doom, he said, that on this world there still lives an ancient elder. A dark shape rose from the mist. Guya straightened, his silhouette swelling until he seemed impossibly large, radiating a force that made even mortals uneasy. I have been reborn, he went on. The ancient elder's blessing has unbound me. The ancient orcs will rise across the galaxy. The thunder faded. Wind blew away steam and dust, and the full sight of Guya was revealed. The orc chieftain, returned from the brink of death, had been utterly transformed, an extraordinary metamorphosis, his crimson eyes fixed on Doom. Doom, my old friend, he intoned, your life will witness the beginning, the day the stars of the galaxy tremble for the orcs. Doom said nothing. He raised a hand, opened his comms, and calmly announced the transfer of command to the Night Watch. Command transferred. Harlan will assume command in my stead. Facing an enemy, the likes of which he'd never seen before, Doom chose caution. He couldn't afford to be distracted in the fight, so he made a clean decision: transfer command. Harlan was the obvious choice. Everyone knew him for his swordsmanship and personal prowess. Fewer knew that his battlefield instincts and command sense were just as sharp. Doom had noticed how quickly Harlan read shifting situations. He just hated broadcasting his thoughts. Transfer confirmed. Harlan acknowledged. There was no time to hesitate. As Guya rose to his feet, something in the orc formation shifted with him. Their strikes grew harsher and more coordinated, funneling into purposeful clusters that began mounting effective counterattacks against the Night Watch. Grasping the danger, Harlan took control and barked orders over the comms. Concentrate heavy fire on the orc pivot points. Phantoms, snipe high-value targets. Units immediately responded, repositioning and opening fire under Harlan's direction. Chapter 54. Unprecedented strongest enemy. The holographic display inside the helmet streamed battlefield intelligence non-stop. Harlan read the feeds as best he could, but without Doom's formidable mind to interpret and act on the data, he had to strain to keep control. He barked orders, then fell back. His white form moved quickly toward the orc stronghold to take command of the Night Watch on the front line. This coming clash was not for mortals or ordinary orcs. Do you really think you can take me? Doom's gaze cut across Guya like a blade. Even he had to admit the other's current state was terrifyingly powerful. Guya's heart hammered. The memory of his past defeat still haunted him, a nightmare carved into his bones. He clenched his fists as raw power surged through him, and a fierce grin spread across his face. Why wouldn't I? His voice rolled like thunder as he contemptuously waved a hand at Doom's waist. Look at you. You're not even half my height. He towered 8 meters tall. His dark green skin had a rough, desolate texture. Muscles bulged and rippled across his frame, especially along his broad, scarred back. He was no longer the squat, bulky brute he used to be. His legs had lengthened into something long and powerful. His once crimson armor had been ripped apart by those swelling muscles, hanging in tatters over dark green, savage flesh. But Doom saw more than the torn metal and hulking shape. His gaze pierced the surface and read the core beneath. This was not the simple, mindless beast he remembered. After the transformation, the orc boss still carried a feral body brimming with explosive strength, but some of the raw, blind aggression had been tempered. Guya moved now with the authority of a commander rather than the reckless fury of the old orc boss. Doom felt it plainly. The corrupt, roaring pull of the wag field that had formerly fueled him was gone. The field still clung to him like a vestigial aura, but the power animating him came from Guya himself, no external force directing his blows. A strange, almost delighted chuckle escaped Guya. Heh! Heh! And then he lunged at Doom. The ground shuddered under his weight. Every footfall was a pounding drumbeat, a muffled thunder that struck the chest as much as the earth. Yet his assault was not merely a series of heavy stomps. Coiled energy released from those long limbs made his movements shockingly precise and fast, swift and deadly in their control. To the watching orcs and members of the Night Watch, all they could make out was a figure churning blood-soaked mud and whipping up gusts of wind. He moved with terrifying speed and immense, coiled power. Strength filled him, and with it came a swelling, almost physical confidence. He nonchalantly snatched up a discarded battle axe. The two-handed great axe suddenly felt light enough to wield in one hand. Each swing tore through the air with a roar. There was only one person on the field who could possibly stop him, only one who deserved to face him. Doom's sneer sharpened. The cold in his eyes crystallized into pure killing intent. He had every reason to put Guya down here, and now. He tapped the sensor on the haft, and the dimensional blade slid out again. Pushing off with his legs, he lunged at the oncoming Guya. They moved like phantoms, so fast that ordinary eyes could not follow their duel. Sonic booms cracked without pause. With every thunderous echo across the battlefield, the two combatants, creatures beyond the ken of ordinary fighters, had already exchanged dozens, even hundreds of blows. A terrifying scene unfolded. In the center of the battlefield where the two beasts fought, nobody dared intervene. Even the sharpshooters with the keenest eyes and the most advanced targeting systems couldn't make out their forms or lock onto their positions. It was a battlefield, and at the same time it felt like something else entirely. The dissonance came from the two non-human combatants. Their movements had long since outpaced human thought. Your battle plan has made multiple mistakes to tie. Hey! Guya roared, bringing his battle axe down and using his height to press Doom back. Exhilaration surged through him. The raw pleasure of the clash drove him to laugh. This was the first time he had forced Doom onto the defensive in a straight-up confrontation, the first time he'd tasted the pure joy of battle. Just a minor error, easily corrected, Doom said coolly. He shifted his body a hair, and Guya's axe blade clipped past, stopping mere inches from his skin. The cold of the great axe brushed him, and something changed in his face. The usual blankness thawed, replaced by a keen, almost predatory interest flashing in his eyes. Doom had an absolute edge over every opponent on the field. It had been a long time since a fight had given him this much pleasure. With every punch and kick, every clash of steel, his normally calm emotions edged higher. The dormant, innate power in his body, dulled from lack of real challenge, began to stir under Guya's assaults. It rose like a white-hot fury, threaded with a resolute killing intent that seemed to fill every cell of Doom's body. He wanted to howl, to let the rage loose. Still, the heat in his chest never overrode his reason. Doom's mind stayed unbearably cold and clear, steady, unshaken by the storm within him. It was a strange juxtaposition, ice and fire coexisting. His cold rationality kept his thoughts precise and strategic, while the anger fed his strength. It was not the mindless, reckless fury of the hot-headed. Instead, his wrath was channeled, made into power. Guya, meanwhile, had changed. After his transformation, his thinking sharpened noticeably. He made perfect use of the increased arm length that came with his new height, and that reach gave him an oddly oppressive edge in the fight. The great axe arced back and forth, each swing driving Doom steadily backward. He could match Guya's speed, but the other man's grip and control of the axe were ironclad. There was simply no opening for Doom to close in. Doom frowned, methodically parsing the details of the fight. For the first time in a one-on-one duel, he found himself physically suppressed. He who was used to dominating his opponents now tasted helplessness. The way Guya constrained the fighting range made every counterattack painfully difficult. When two combatants were otherwise evenly matched in strength and speed, the reach advantage became deadly clever. Guya was the most formidable opponent Doom had ever faced. Brutal in appearance, but possessing an equally extraordinary cunning beneath it. A prickle of annoyance ran through Doom. If he had his longsword and could drop the restraining field, he could widen his own reach instantly. The heavy axe in his hand offered no such remedy. Guya never forced a direct blade clash. He struck in ways that avoided a head-on collision of metal. Doom realized, with a cold certainty, that that iron head was no match for the dimensional blade. Against it, the axe was little more than paper. Every time he swung his axe, Doom calculated the trajectory and the angle of the cut, careful not to let the blade be sheared off. This was a fight where savagery and cold calculation moved in step. As he dodged and parried, Doom measured the gap between them. In raw physical strength, Guya couldn't match him in a straight-up brawl. Still, the current orc boss was fighting with a new intelligence. The hot-headed fury he'd shown before had been replaced by a frightening calm. Another axe stroke came down. Doom slipped aside and knew he had to seize the initiative. He sharpened his awareness to the battlefield, processed the situation, and in a fraction of a second made his decision, then launched his counterattack. The duel was razor close. One small mistake could be fatal. Doom's luck ran out. As he pulled back, his foot slid on a corpse and he staggered, balance broken for an instant. "Die for me!" Guya roared, arrogant and brutal, madness flashing in his eyes. "Taste the bitter fruit of death, Doom." He seized the opening and drove a killing blow toward Doom. The swing shifted from a wide sweep into a single downward chop, the blade cutting a clean line through the air. Doom seized the hard-won opening. He tightened his muscles, snapped his balance back into place, then flicked the axe with his right hand, just enough to control its fall and keep it from dropping too fast. He closed his hand into a fist and thrust it up at Guya's descending axe. At the exact instant, the attacker's force petered out and he couldn't pull the blow back. Guya's small eyes went blank with confusion. Then a brutal, metallic crack split the air. Boom! Bare flesh slammed into forged iron with the ring of steel. Blood spurted from Doom's knuckles, but the punch met and deflected the falling axe, astonishingly stopping what had seemed like an unstoppable strike. The axe head took a deep dent in the shape of a fist. The web between Guya's thumb and forefinger was torn. His arm went numb, and shock widened his eyes. Before he could recover, Doom's next move had already driven him onto the defensive. The axe haft hung for a heartbeat, frozen between their flashing blows. Doom's right hand slapped aside the iron axe's downward arc, while his left shot under and plucked his discarded hand axe out of the air. He closed his fingers around it, and the dimensional battle axe sprang free. In an instant, he turned the tide. Doom surged forward, the blade flashing, using Guya's own forward momentum to drive a surgically precise counterstrike toward the orc's midsection. Fear flickered across Guya's face. The calm, ancient composure he'd worn moments before fell away and was replaced by raw surprise. If that strike landed, it would have split him at the waist. Instinct saved him. Guya slammed his hips shut, drawing on raw physical power to abruptly halt his advance. His lower body slid on, while his torso arched back just enough to keep the axe from cleaving him in two. Foolish, Doom spat, a cold, scornful laugh following the word. He closed the distance even more, then suddenly pulled his left hand back and swept it through. A trick Guya didn't see until it was too late. Once again, he had been outplayed. Doom had left a deliberate tiny opening. He had calculated that the vengeful Guya would bite. A sweep of blue light flashed from right to left, followed by a spray of crimson. The dimensional axe blade's glow was cold and dazzling, like the gleam of the Grim Reaper's scythe in Guya's eyes. Agony exploded in his lower limb. Doom's true aim had been Guya's right leg, the leg the orc had planted forward to steady himself. The dimensional blade sliced through the ancient orc's dark green flesh as if through air, cleanly severing the limb. The fight was effectively over, in a duel measured in picoseconds, with exchanges firing off hundreds of times per second. Losing a leg meant immediate failure and a sentence of death. Guya pitched to the right, but he wasn't the sort to give up. Summoning his last reserves, he locked his weight onto his left leg and with his remaining strength, swung his axe in a desperate horizontal arc aimed straight for Doom's neck. Doom would never meet that strike head-on. He didn't go for a flashy finish. Instead, he widened his stance, dropped his center, and spun with controlled force, a low, sweeping kick aimed exactly where it would hurt the most. His boot slammed into Guya's last usable leg. Guya's eyes went wide. The strike ripped his balance away. With a strangled sound, he buckled, pitching forward as the injured limb gave out beneath him. The scrape of leather on bone echoed through the courtyard. Then silence snapped into a gasp from the watching crowd. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the two of them, the metallic tang of adrenaline, the thud of a heart in his ears, the soft thump as Guya hit the ground. He hit his palms on the stone to steady himself, every muscle coiled for whatever came next. Guya curled, one hand clamped to the ruined leg, his breath coming sharp and shallow. He held his ground, measuring the fallen man. Mission accomplished. The advantage he'd seized a moment before had been decisive. Now it was only a matter of choice. Press the attack or spare him. The answer hovered between them like the dust motes in the sun, waiting to be made. Chapter 55, Towards the Truth. Guya's eyes were filled with such helplessness, he looked ready to burst into tears, sniffling like a petulant child. A bitter, helpless laugh escaped him, the kind that comes when you're utterly at a loss. And in that instant, his balance gave way. His 8-meter-tall body came crashing down. In a fight this fast and razor-sharp, even a moment in the air means you've lost your footing completely. With his right leg already severed and the left one tripped, Guya hit that vulnerable sweet spot where he was utterly defenseless. Doom wasn't finished. He seized the opening, driving his battle axe up from below in a single clean arc. Ribbons of dimensional light sliced through Guya from right waist to left armpit, leaving impossibly smooth wounds and cutting out his heart to make sure he could not revive. Everyone on the battlefield saw who had decided the outcome. Doom still stood, and Guya lay broken on the ground. Nothing had changed. But for those watching, the sight was slightly different. Guya's fierce cry of "Die" had barely left his lips before he toppled to the ground, so sudden and absurd that people couldn't help laughing. The orcs hadn't even had time to cheer, and the Night Watch hadn't yet begun to worry. The outcome was settled in an instant. Doom stood over him, having rendered Guya utterly helpless. He looked down with a mocking tilt to his mouth. "An ancient orc? That's all?" he sneered. Still, beneath the mockery, he felt a tangible relief. Thin, nearly invisible strands of energy ran from Guya to the other orcs, threads Doom could sense. If Guya remained alive, those connections would be a latent danger, a wild card that might change the course of the fight. He eased the axe so the blade rested against Guya's thick neck and asked softly, almost conversationally, "Any last words, my friend?" Doom had been there for much of Guya's life. He'd raised him and watched him grow. There was no hatred in this ending, only the hard acceptance of what needed to be done. Guya returned his look and, to Doom's surprise, smiled. It was a small, relieved smile. In that instant, he seemed to let go of everything, the duties and burdens he had carried that were never truly his to bear. "Accept my gift." Guya clenched his teeth, wrapped his fingers around the last large tooth left in his lower jaw, and with a raw, animal effort, tore it free. Blood ran down his chin as he held the tooth out to Doom. "The only ancient orc tooth in the universe. My greatest respect." Doom took it without ceremony, slipped it into his belt, and looked down at Guya, who was barely breathing. "Thank you," he said. For a moment, Doom's eyes went distant. He had once hoped for something else. The ancient Wag was a field of unstable possibility. Under its influence, they very likely rode right through the Nuer Ring's dimensional conversion shield. If they had approached it differently, if they had harnessed the orc's Wag, there might have been a way off Nuer. But orc minds were simple, driven by violence and the search for it. Guya had shown flashes of cunning, yes, but you couldn't build a cooperative plan on nothing but rage and impulse. Doom shook his head with a small, regretful motion and raised his blade. When he cut Guya down, the effect was immediate and terrible. The death of the orc boss sent a peculiar ripple through the Wag. The orc's feral will faltered. They turned as one toward the spot where Guya had fallen, faces suddenly stripped of fury and full of fear. The front line gave way and collapsed in an instant. They broke and scattered in every direction, screaming. But Doom's preparations had been thorough. This place was no accidental battleground, but a deliberate killing ground for orcs. The Night Watch had sealed the field, and the fleeing remnants of the orc army ran straight into the hunting grounds, exhausting themselves on terrain that had been planned to trap them. After dealing with Guya, Doom rejoined the hunt and fell into step with the main force. Coordinated and ruthless, they finished the slaughter. With Doom back in the fight, it took less than 10 minutes before the last orc fell and its head was cut off, the final sign that Nur's green skin crisis was over. The orcs who had once driven humanity to the brink had been wiped out. The people of Nur would no longer live under the threat of greenskin invaders. "A glorious victory," someone cried. Harlan stood atop an orc war machine, his white power armor spattered with blood, a spear driven through an orc's skull. He bellowed, "Victory!" The Night Watch roared in response. Wariness and fear washed away by elation, they cheered for having finally purged Nur of the green blight and reclaimed their brilliant world. The Night Watch stared up at their giant warlord, Doom, who held the orc chieftain's head aloft. His name rolled over the field like thunder. Doom! 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 They had been unbeatable under his lead. The victory felt absolute. Doom's deep voice cut through the cheers. But where there should have been exultation, there was a hollow sorrow that settled over every man. "This victory is not mine alone," he said, and the sound of his words drew the ranks into silence. "It belongs to every warrior who stood beside me, and to everyone who gave what they had to this battle. For this glorious hour, some have gone from us forever, returned to the embrace of Nur," he continued. He bowed his head as if to the fallen. His voice, still low and resonant, carried a grief that infected the gathered soldiers. "Their sacrificed lives, the very cornerstone of our triumph, are more worthy of our cheers than any looted spoils. Glory to the fallen!" Doom led the cry. The Night Watch snapped to attention and answered with a fierce, solemn roar. "Glory to the fallen!" After a brief, understated celebration, the men set to the work that remained, gathering the orc corpses and preparing the pyres for a shared cremation. Smoke and embers would mark the end of the battle and the passing of those lost. Doom stepped over to Harlan, who sat catching his breath among the wreckage, and placed the massive head of Guya into his hands. "This is for you," he said. Collecting the skulls of powerful foes was Harlan's private hobby. His house was packed with them. When he saw Guya's head, his eyes lit up. It would be a perfect addition. He sprang to his feet and reached for it with both hands, but a sharp hiss escaped him instead. "Are you hurt?" Doom asked, catching Harlan with a big, steadying hand. He frowned with genuine concern. "Who could hurt you?" By Harlan's reckoning, no one on the field except Guya had the power to wound him. He tried to sound contemptuous, with an edge of annoyance. "I'm fine. Who could hurt me?" Then, with a grim look, he tugged back the cape over his breastplate to show the damage. A jagged gash ran across his power armor from left to right. A scorched, cracked shell remained lodged in the plating. Beneath it, his chest was a bloody ruin. Ribs jutted where they were broken, bone exposed, and his heart beat faintly and hard. Doom's expression turned grave, and he quickly helped Harlan sit down. "Go ahead and laugh if you want," Harlan said, smirking as he watched an odd twitch ripple across Doom's face. An attempt at a laugh stopped dead by iron control. Doom didn't actually laugh. His discipline flattened the impulse before it could show. "Call the medics and get yourself patched up," Harlan added. "Once the cremation is done, we head back. Don't hold anything up." "I already did," Doom replied. "Someone else is worse off than me, so they'll get there first." He handed the orc boss's head to Harlan. Harlan nodded, drew a small, precise knife, and began to skin the head while they waited. The motion was practiced, clinical. After a moment, he glanced at Doom's hands. "What about you? Are your hands okay?" His tone had genuine concern. "This is the first time I've seen you injured." Doom smiled and lifted the back of his hand. The skin there gleamed healthy, no rips, no dried blood. "They healed a while ago," he zapped aid. When he'd taken down Guya, his wounds had closed almost instantly. The whole recovery had taken less than 5 seconds. Doom shrugged, as if the speed amused him. "I didn't even realize I could heal like that," he added, raising an eyebrow at Harlan and letting his eyes flick briefly to the scar across Harlan's chest, a small, knowing show of it. "Are you terribly idle?" Harlan's face tightened. Blood had drained his complexion to a sickly pale, and his mouth twitched, an impatient little tell. "Technically, yes. Very idle," Doom said seriously. 3 seconds to form the idea, a few minutes to put it into motion, and then nothing else to do. Harlan lowered his head without replying. He took a few steadying breaths and went back to working on Guya's head. Doom smiled faintly, turned, and left without disturbing him. He climbed back aboard the war fortress. There were urgent matters demanding attention. Reports from the battle needed his approval at the command throne, and the Night Watch waited for his orders. As he issued commands, Doom kept thinking about the black-robed figure. Who was he, and how could he force Guya to evolve and fight nearly on par with Doom himself? If that power could be used repeatedly, the man was a serious threat. One thing Doom could now be sure of: this mysterious power user was not on the orcs' side. He'd had opportunities before to help the orcs transform, but he'd never taken them. If the mysterious stranger had intended to aid the orcs, there was every chance humanity on Nur would not still exist, a thought that left Doom unsettled. Why would someone do that? It was a simple question, but it baffled him. He felt as if an invisible net were tightening around him, yet he couldn't tell where the threat lay. A moment later, he forced himself to steady his mind and turn back to the work at hand. The future hadn't arrived yet. Instead of worrying or speculating, it made more sense to deal with the present. How he handled things now would be the anchor for whatever came next, and the choices he made today could genuinely shape that future. Doom was known for dealing with immediate problems with uncommon foresight. Finish everything, rest one day, then leave for the City of Truth. Ennio Novick. He was Novick's eldest son and the heir apparent to the Novick throne. Right now, this naturally elegant prince was commanding nearly 10,000 men of the Night Watch, maintaining a blockade around the outskirts of the City of Truth for half a year. Despite being unable to resolve certain critical questions, Ennio, at his father's insistence, kept the cordon at a carefully calculated distance, severing all outside communication with the city while avoiding any unnecessary risk. For 6 months, the City of Truth sat frozen. No one left, and no one entered. The Night Watch executed their orders with religious discipline, practicing daily mental cleansings and self-inspections to ensure no psychic influence could find an opening. Ennio also rotated the more vulnerable technical staff on a strict schedule, preventing mental fatigue or cracks that sorcerers might exploit. He left nothing to chance and carried out his duties without a single flaw. On the morning of the 6th day of the 6th month of the blockade, Ennio dreamed again of the woman who always brought that impossible scent. She was everything his imagination had ever built up as the future princess, so precisely his ideal, it felt as if the Creator had shaped her for him alone. She embodied beauty itself. A long purple gown clinging to a slender waist hung with gold and jewels, a pink lining supporting a generous bosom, skin as pale and smooth as porcelain, and a soft fragrance that drifted around her like a visible mist. Bathed in pink and violet haze, Ennio lay with his head against her cool, flawless thigh. The scent in his nose calmed him, making his muscles go slack. Her voice, when she spoke, was low and lingering, with just a hint of husk that made it impossible not to listen. Ennio Novik. Her single, sultry syllable seemed to pull at something deep inside him. He was naked, and her long, delicate fingers, nails lacquered a bright color and set with tiny gems, glided lightly up from his well-defined abdomen, leaving a trail of ticklish warmth in their wake. Ennio Novik, the fated king. She leaned close, her voice soft as milk against his ear, each word a quiet current of regret and sorrow, with an edge of something like reluctance. With an outsider's arrival, you'll never take the throne. That's all right. Ennio turned onto his side and tucked his head into her thigh, settling more comfortably. This way, I'll be with you forever. Her fingers trembled minutely. She couldn't understand it. The throne had been stolen by an outsider, a lifetime of ideals ruined, yet his ambition seemed to have vanished. Where was his resentment toward his brother? Where was the refusal to accept defeat? "Isn't it better to be lazy and at peace?" he murmured, his large hand roaming her slender waist. "My brother is stronger, more capable than I am, more fit to rule." "Are you really that magnanimous?" she asked, tasting something else beneath his words. His magnanimity carried a faint bitterness, a ghost of jealousy. The man in her arms did not quite mean what he said. His true feelings lay buried, deep and careful, beneath the easy calm he showed. She loved jealousy. Jealousy and resentment were twins, born of the same anger at feeling powerless. "What good would being magnanimous do?" Ennio said. He lay back, his head resting comfortably between the woman's thighs, and reached up to stroke her warm, jade-like cheek. "I respect my father's decision. I don't have the strength to stand against my brother." "My dear." The woman's purple pupils flashed with a seductive light, her words steering his thoughts. "Maybe you just need a little help." "What kind of help?" Ennio asked, shrugging, but his tone was serious. He knew this world intimately. In raw military power, no one could match Doom, and in foresight and wisdom, no one rivaled his father. She smiled, running her fingers through his hair. Her full red lips parted and closed as she spoke. "Believe in the Prince of Pleasure, and you'll gain power and wisdom. He will give you an army to conquer with, so you can take the throne, rule, and revel in the splendor and excess of power." Ennio's eyes brightened as though he'd already seen it. Ennio's arm slid up until his hand cradled the back of her neck. His voice snapped cold. "Is this what you wanted? You harlot." The curse stunned her for a heartbeat. The intoxicating glaze in his eyes, what had held him moments before, was gone. With a single forceful movement, his large hand tightened around her throat, and he shoved her to the floor. His tone, once smooth and cultivated, had gone razor-sharp. "Is this the Prince of Pleasure you mean, the one who keeps tormenting my father?" The beguiling look drained from her face. Horror replaced seduction as she realized he had not been ensnared. "You weren't affected?" she hissed, no longer languid. Ennio snorted. His emerald eyes were clear and hard. He tightened his grip, intent on strangling her. "Didn't Isaac warn you? Don't try to corrupt a warrior's heart." She screamed, clawing at his arms and trying to push him off. As she struggled, the porcelain smoothness of her swan-like neck split and flaked away, revealing pallid purple flesh studded with black, scale-like ridges. The sudden violent transformation shocked Ennio. Instinct took over. He flinched, and unconsciously, his grip loosened. When faced with an unknown threat, a true warrior observes and assesses, confirms how dangerous the enemy really is, and finds the best way to eliminate them, rather than charging in with hot blood when the balance of power is unclear. The woman slipped free of her restraints. Her lithe body slid across the ground like a hideous serpent, quickly moving out of Ennio's reach. When she rose, the stunning beauty that had been there moments before was grotesquely warped into something unnatural and repulsive. A thin, black and purple tongue, slick with slime, flicked from a narrow circular mouth, dripping viscous saliva. Her frame had become long and twisted, oddly combining the bulk of a man's muscles with the soft curves of a woman. One side of her chest bulged into a towering feminine fullness, while the other had hardened into a powerful pectoral. She wore sheer gauze and light armor studded with precious gems and flashing gold, both magnificent and demonic. Along her elongated torso sprouted 4 arms. 2 ended in human-like hands capable of normal grasping, the other 2 in scorpion-like pincers, their edges glinting with cruel sharpness. "How truly ugly," Ennio hissed, his face darkening. "No wonder you take on a beautiful guise. You're hideous in your true form." The creature's horizontal pupils tightened. Offended, it straightened and spoke with a disdain that might have been pride. "Ugly? This graceful body, born from my lord's wildest imaginings, is perfection." Its voice lost the earlier softness and snapped into a piercing shriek that drilled into Ennio's ears, warping clear thought into warped delusion. How could mortal perception judge a beauty that exists beyond the world of men? "I don't care for your master's taste," Ennio said, interrupting. He didn't want to be dragged into a debate about aesthetics. "Answer me. Why do you come into my dreams? What do you want?" The creature began to retreat, gliding back with a mock elegance. It called his name deliberately, each syllable echoing, Ennio Novik. A purple mist coiled around its twisted form and then swallowed it whole. From within the haze came a voice both amused and predatory. "I am the keeper of shameful secrets. We will meet very soon." Then it was gone. Ennio stared at the spot where the mist had been, the words reverberating in his mind. "Keeper of secrets? We will meet soon?" Ennio lowered his head, turning the monster's parting words over in his mind. Then, without warning, he looked up toward the spot where it had vanished. Inside the City of Truth, behind high walls ringed with psychic wards, a blasphemous rite was in full swing. 6 priests in black and purple robes, embroidered with jewels and filigree of gold, stood at 6 evenly spaced ends around a vast magic circle. Their scepters struck the earth in a relentless rhythm, producing a grotesque 6-syllable refrain. The circle itself, a colossal disk 6,666 square meters in area, glowed with a sickly pink-purple light. Within it, 66,666 believers and sacrifices writhed and chanted, enacting a divine ritual meant to pull a host from the other shore into the world. The number 6 was sacred to Slaanesh. His rites were structured in multiples of 6, 66, or 666 sacrifices, depending on the scale of the summoning. These ceremonies were drenched in decadent desire. In the circular pit at the center, the faithful reveled and fed the ritual's power, straining the veil between reality and illusion. "How beautiful," Isaac murmured, narrowing his eyes as he looked down from the high tower into the ritual pit. He could feel the god's power like a current washing up the stone beneath his feet, and the sensation made him giddy. For 6 days, 6 nights, and 6 hours the worship had been building, at first drinking and song, then a slow slide into more carnal excess. Now, in the circular pit below, there was nothing left of restraint, a writhing, frenzied mass of bodies, every taboo broken in the name of worship. Strange growths sprouted from the believer's skin, some like extra hands, groping at new textures and hungrily seeking sensation, some like additional eyes, taking in grotesque, impossible scenes, some like ears, catching alien sounds that unsettled the mind. Each new appendage brought a fresh, overwhelming stimulus. Each new stimulus unmoored them further. As their moral anchors snapped, the revelry filled the hollow places in their hearts. They drowned their lives in madness, their souls sliding toward chaos. What had started as longing twisted into something unrecognizable and cruel. The air below was thick with sweat and wild noise, a convulsion of need that left little of human dignity intact. Beside Isaac, a priest in a purple robe opened his eyes and watched the pit with a displeased expression. He said nothing, but his face made clear that whatever satisfaction Isaac felt, the priest's judgment was far from approval. "I told you long ago, the will of the Night Watch is as hard as tempered steel. Without a proper ritual or a real medium, trying to break into their dreams is only asking to be humiliated." Isaac said it with a look of pure contempt. The keeper of secrets, by contrast, was all appetite, always eager to probe and provoke, always hungry for new mysteries, restless even when confined to a human form. It leaned forward, tasting the air with a long, sinuous tongue, savoring the decadent sweetness that hung around the ritual as it hit its peak. "It won't be long," the creature purred. "I'll cast off this pathetic disguise and finish him myself." Chapter 57, Xiaoxi Demonic Disaster. The Keeper of Secrets seethed with humiliation and hunger for revenge. It wanted to kill Ennio with its own hands. Isaac raised an eyebrow and shot a warning at the demon in a cold tone. He had already failed once. He would not let the Master's grand plan be jeopardized again. The Keeper of Secrets simply sneered at Isaac's caution. Proud and ancient, it had been summoned into the world by a divine oracle. Why would a mere mortal who worshipped the Lord of Change imagine he could manage the larger design? The demon's disdain was a palpable thing in the charged air. Then the sky split like a shattered mirror. The ritual's intensity tore through the barrier between realms, and warped energies, sickly, shifting colors, cascaded down like a waterfall. From the magic array's torrents of ichor and essence, a waiting legion spilled into reality. A voice, or several voices at once, announced their arrival. Xiaoxi Hellbane, the Prince of Pleasure's chief great demon, has come by divine oracle and will temporarily obey your command. Legend says that when Slaanesh first came into being, he was struck down by Khorne. The 6 rings that symbolized temptation and corruption were broken, and he was torn apart by Skarbrand, Khorne's bloodthirster. Slaanesh, unwilling to accept defeat, answered by birthing Xiaoxi Hellbane, the Dark Prince's chief great demon. Keepers of Secrets take many forms. They are born from the Dark Prince's capricious, twisted fantasies, each a new incarnation of Slaanesh's obsessions. Xiaoxi Hellbane was neither as savage and bloodthirsty as Khorne's denizens, nor as slender as some other Keepers of Secrets. It was Slaanesh's masterpiece, powerful and beautiful, a flawless balance of grace and strength. After its birth, Xiaoxi Hellbane more than justified that faith, challenging every demon in the warp without suffering a single defeat, at one point even besting the ferocious Skarbrand. It wore a feathered headdress shaped like ram's horns. Its muscular upper body was bare, while a magnificent battle skirt wrapped its sculpted lower limbs, subtly revealing 2 alluring demon hooves. 2 massive main arms gripped a double-bladed weapon in one hand and a shimmering magic shield in the other. 2 smaller arms swept back behind it, each tipped with keratinous blades so razor-sharp they dripped venom. It had answered the summons, carrying the will of a god, even as it was temporarily bound to obey the Tzeentch cultist who had called it forth. Slaanesh had sent its finest servant. Leading a full demon legion, the Keeper of Secrets descended on the City of Truth, its forces directed straight at the Night Watch. The great demon had ripped aside its mortal guise and joined Shirash's ranks. An entire legion, marshaled beneath 6 towering Keepers of Secrets, stepped out of the city with unnervingly graceful precision. Isaac stood on the city wall and called down to them. "Temper your arrogance. Beware the Night Watch. You might find their strength surpasses what you expect." One of the Keepers of Secrets turned, a cruel smile of contempt on its face, then resumed its inexorable march. Confronted by that arrogance, Isaac saw there was nothing more to be gained by argument. He left the wall, descended to the sacrificial array, and prepared himself, waiting for the rebirth that was to come. Demons, by their nature, carry an inscrutable arrogance. They look down on mortals and scorn any counsel offered to them. With a thunderous boom, the gate opened. Out of the mist stepped Xiaoxi, flanked by 6 Keeper of Secrets, towering great daemons, followed by ranks of daemonettes and Slaaneshi beasts. Together they made an army of 6,666, emerging slowly from the haze. They marched with an awful exuberance. Demon hooves struck the earth in a rhythm that made blasphemous music, a perverse fanfare praising the Prince of Pleasure. The Slaaneshi beasts swayed as they moved, their bulk both threatening and seductive. Each had a centaur-like build, a powerful hindbody with a heavy tail and small, almost delicate skin. Their lower limbs ended in 4 hooves that looked wrong to the human eye. The 4 hooves curled backward while the hind hooves pointed forward, and their flesh exuded a heady, musk-like scent. Above that lower mass rose lithe upper bodies, arms ending in massive keratinous claws that flashed with purple light and dripped a pale, poisonous fluid. The daemonettes, meanwhile, were a cruel mockery of beauty, long, slender ears and exquisite faces that only made their constant screaming more uncanny. Hermaphroditic and designed to inflame desire, they stirred perverse fantasies in any mortal who beheld them. They screamed, wailed, and danced as they moved, each cry another offering of praise to the Prince of Pleasure. Slaanesch's daemon host rolled across the land like a fever of sensation, an attack on the senses and the mind. Wherever the creatures passed, a sweet, purplish-pink mist crept through the air. Ordinary weeds went rotten with corruption, elongating into long, thorny, twisted things that reached and writhed. The demon's malignant essence spilled outward, poisoning the ground and warping perception itself. The Night Watch found themselves face to face with the extraordinary. Words were unnecessary. Where demons gather, their malice accumulates and radiates, arrogant and unbearable. A single name, Demons, rose in each throat, a primeval fear stamped into human memory and the depths of every soul. It sank into the Night Watch like ice. High above the ranks stood Ennio, plated in power armor and leaning on his spear. He had seen this creature in his dreams, and now it was there in the flesh. The Keeper of Secrets, the great demon, was no longer an unsubstantial vision. It towered 6.5 meters tall, a terrible, seductive archdemon whose beauty was meant to wound, whose presence chilled the marrow. The daemon met Ennio's eyes. Its smile curled with wicked amusement. Deliberately, it raised a hand to its lips and with mock tenderness blew a kiss across the distance. "Sir," the communicator crackled, a voice from the Night Watch, sharp with urgency. "Some of the auxiliary techs, after seeing those things, they've snapped. Complete mental breakdowns." Ennio absorbed the report in a silence that felt colder than the chamber's metal. The Night Watch were telling the truth. The moment the support staff had laid eyes on the demons, something invasive had lodged in their minds. It did not take long for the infection to show itself in babbling, uncoordinated movements, and frighteningly lucid, erratic behavior. There was no time for compassion. "Kill all eyewitnesses," Ennio ordered, his voice flat and remorseless. He did not pause to justify it. If a mind had been branded, he decided, there was no risk worth taking, no bargaining with the seductive whispers that crawled under a person's skin. The demons invaded thought, and thought could become weapon. For the rest, subdue and restrain anyone you can, evacuate them with medical teams. This engagement is not for them. He flicked a hand toward the viewport, toward the smeared horizon where the battle burned. Let the soldiers fight. The technicians were liabilities now. "Understood," came the reply, terse and immediate. The Night Watch moved with the same grim efficiency that had made them feared and respected. They struck down former colleagues with the practiced, detached brutality of professionals used to hard choices. Men and women they had shared jokes and shifts with were cut down in seconds because the alternative was worse. A single corrupted mind capable of opening the weakest door to whatever those demons wanted. Those who still had their wits were forcibly restrained, knocked out where necessary, bundled into armored carriers, and evacuated. The Night Watch worked quickly, hearts numb to the work, because they knew, better than anyone, how fast an infection could spread. A warrior trained to steel his mind could hold back the first whispers. A civilian technician whose will had never been forged in the crucible of combat could not. As the transports roared away, a Night Watch leader barked the unit name into the comms. "Night Watch." His voice was steady. They already had a new mission. Hold the line, contain the darkness, and make certain no more minds were lost. Hold your ground. Annihilate those foul creatures who dare desecrate Nur's purity. Outside the City of Truth, a cordon of Night Watchers had been tightening for over half a year. Dozens of temporary forts and blockades ringed the plain, built for exactly this purpose. At Ennio's node, 1,000 Night Watch stood battle-ready, armor glinting, weapons prepared. "Record," Ennio barked to his adjutant as the purple tide on the horizon rolled closer. The Night Watch prided themselves on careful reports. Every engagement was logged so their tactics could be refined for the next encounter. On the wide grassland between the nearest fortress and the city, the Legion, led by the Keeper of Secrets, a great demon, halted. Its vanguard stopped just beyond the guard's maximum range. The lead demon stepped forward with an air of elegant arrogance, raised a hand in an oddly ceremonial gesture, and spoke in a voice that was at once harsh and oddly neutral. I am Shalaxi Hellbane, first under the Prince of Pleasure, mortal. Nearby, a lesser demon named Sharash watched, perplexed. It could not understand why so exalted a servant, indeed such a close agent of a god, had been sent on what looked like a simple breakthrough attempt. Despite the distance, the Night Watch's uncanny hearing picked up Shalaxi's proclamation, a strange, genderless shriek that sent a chill through the ranks. "We are the Night Watch!" The cry rolled out like thunder, pride and fury braided into one, and even the discordant war music of the demon horde faltered beneath it. Sharash felt a thrill of excitement. These were no frightened peasants. They were warriors, and that made the coming slaughter all the more delicious. "Smash their fortresses! Crush their courage!" the great demon bellowed. With a high, terrible shriek from Sharash, the demon legion surged forward. They wanted spectacle, the sight of brave mortals collapsing into despair. Screams and 1,000 hooves filled the air as the demons charged, a living wave aimed straight at the Night Watch's fortress. "Night Watch, hold your formations. These enemies are far from ordinary." Ennio roared from his observation tower, his voice slicing through the comms. From above he watched the attack pattern unfold and knew at once that the apparent chaos hid something far more dangerous. The demon line kept shifting, formations folding and bursting apart, then recombining in impossible ways. The beasts they rode were grotesque and swift, darting with uncanny agility. "Fire! Fire! Fire!" came Ennio's command. Blue-white cutting beams flared from the fortress parapets, slicing into the charging ranks. The rays targeted choke points and command clusters, trying to sever the demon formations and throw their advance off balance. Explosions ripped through the air where the beams met flesh and shadow. Sharash smiled without humor. How quaint these mortals and their weapons, so faithful to steel and light, so certain those things would be enough. Vain, he thought, watching the blades cut and the beams scythe through bodies. Noble demons did not fear fire and steel. The great demon had brought this tide knowing how to weather such attacks. The entertainment of their struggle would be far richer than any mere contest of arms. They did not realize that ranged attacks did almost no damage to demons. Demons were divinely protected. Only the most primitive swords and plain fire could actually wound them. The Keeper of Secrets' smile vanished in an instant. A high whinny split the air. An azure blur raced across the battlefield. Then a Slaneshi warhorse, its tubular maw gaping and its long, sinuous tongue lolling, was struck and pitched to the ground, its body tumbling with brutal kinetic force. "Blades, spread out, now!" one of the demon lords barked. The other Keepers of Secrets threw up their arms and howled, signaling the host to disperse. The demons unfurled impossible, physics-defying agility and began to twist away from the incoming strikes. In truth, the Night Watch's weapons were swords and spears. The restraint field had transformed them into elongated blades of dimensional light, and those were exactly the kinds of things that could cut a demon. "Damn mortals! Damn scheming apostles!" Rage flooded the ranks. Sharash had never known defeat. Victory had been its companion since birth. Having suffered this hidden, inexplicable setback, it simply ignored Isaac's earlier warning. Pride and arrogance swelled. Demons never admitted failure. The Night Watch moved like a blade across the open plain, where there was nowhere to hide. Slanesh's demon host became little more than living targets, torn apart under the Night Watch's relentless onslaught. In the Materium, warp spawned intruders. Even great demons capable of rending heaven and earth found their power reduced to less than 1/10 of its true strength. 1,000 Night Watch stood like a blue wall, their wills purified by decades of relentless training, unshaken even by the demons' monstrous visages. Blades, spears, swords, and halberds in their hands flared with cutting light, each strike cleaving and weaving into a dazzling net of blue. They timed their volleys with military precision, staggering fire between units so the onslaught never paused. The Slanesh demons, attuned to the smallest shifts in emotion, felt more than fearless resolve. They felt an instinctive contempt in the human ranks, a visceral revulsion at the ugly. That disdain struck at them as surely as any blade, putting the Daemon Legion on the back foot. At the same time, Shalaxi Hellbane and the other Keepers of Secrets moved like dancer kings, tapping out relentless rhythms with their cloven hooves. Their steps drew in the warp currents coursing through the city's ritual arrays. The arrays answered. Mottled, God-touched power surged upward and then poured back down, bathing the demon hosts in a sheen of chaos energy. A gust of wind blew toward the Night Watch's entrenchments. It carried the demons' hallucinogenic perfume, an otherworldly scent the respirator filters could not fully stop. Through gaps in their power armor, the taint slipped into helmets, into mouths and noses. Those who inhaled it were assailed by vivid hallucinations. Where there should have been grotesque demons, they saw family members, lovers, faces they had lost and missed. "False," someone shouted. The Night Watch did not hesitate. They opened fire on the phantoms, discipline held. Each soldier knew the enemy was trying to twist their senses. "Comrades, purify your hearts. Do not let them stir your feelings," a veteran barked. "Not just feelings. Watch for any slackness or fatigue. Don't let it take root." A man let out a low roar as a murderous impulse surged through him, far stronger than anything he had felt before. If he gave in, he would cease to be a warrior and become a puppet consumed by slaughter. The perfumed wind whipped around them, sharpening the Night Watch's vigilance until it was razor-bright. Illusions flashed before their eyes until they were indistinguishable from reality. An irresistible fatigue seeped through their limbs, and intrusive, distracting thoughts wormed their way into their minds, clinging stubbornly. The Night Watch beat back the visions with nothing but willpower and constant psychological suggestion, silently repeating the same reminder: none of this is real. The battle was already being fought where it mattered most, not only on the field, but in the mind. Before swords could even be drawn, a contest of consciousness had begun. Through the perfumed mist, the demon host moved like living shadow. Only flashes of motion betrayed them. Agile, weaving silhouettes rising and falling in the haze as they slid closer to the stone barricades and chevaux de frise lining the front line. Shalaxi Hellbane narrowed its demonic eyes, letting its gaze cut through the fog to study the white-armored warriors before it. They were mortal flesh and blood, lacking the blood god's blessing, yet they stood fearless. Their steadiness matched the boldness of Khorne's own daemons, if not his servants' rabid bloodlust. They met the coming demons without flinching. Slaanesh's mist, which usually worked without fail, faltered against their stubborn will. If the Prince of Pleasure's cloud of warp corruption hadn't been constantly fed with power, the enemy would already have been torn back into the immaterium. Even supplied, though, the mist could only do so much. The daemon host was taking brutal casualties. Blades that glowed with cold blue light ignored the usual protections of chaos, slicing through gifts of daemonhood as if they were paper. 2 keepers of secrets collapsed beneath the barrage, their essences spilled back into the ritual lattice that sustained them, to be stored and reborn only when the array could be charged again. Daemonettes and Slaaneshi beasts were cut down in droves, and the swift, leaping Slaaneshi steeds, the shock troops meant to smash the enemy, were singled out and slaughtered. What had been intended as a massacre became a rout. In less than a minute, the charging legion had lost half its number. Slaanesh had warned him, "Bring engines of war. Do not underestimate the enemy." Shalaxi Hellbane had turned up his chin and thrown that counsel away, convinced that a mortal army, cowardly, fearful, flesh and blood, could be broken by a single, furious charge from his fast attack units. Pride had been cheaper than prudence. Behind the curtains of the palace, the Prince of Pleasure watched it all. He lounged on silks and cushions, languid and amused, playing a petty game with his court of palace maidens as the battle unfolded below. He needed to vent. Watching Shalaxi Hellbane squirm, full of regret and reluctant fury, was its own reward. His servant had always been arrogant, forever treating everything as trivial. Now, confronted with an unexpected reverse, the tangled emotions leaking from him were delicious to the god. He had no intention of helping. He gorged on the sight of failure. To the chaos god, even his mightiest great demons were no more than chaos spawn. When a creation stopped entertaining him, he would simply make another. Whatever his followers called proud and cherished meant nothing to him. A purple-pink supernatural mist rolled toward the front lines. The Night Watch's gunfire vanished against it like pebbles dropped into the sea. No sensors could pierce that veil. While they kept blindly firing, the mist suddenly sank low, and a twisted, centaur-like form tore out of it. Then another, 66 Slaaneshi beasts in all, transcendent behemoths unleashed and primed to shatter the enemy defenses. It burst out of the mist like a breaching whale, then folded its lithe body and sank back down high. Its fore and hind hooves splayed in opposite directions to give it uncanny agility. The Slaaneshi beast flipped in the air with a dancer's grace, clearing the ground obstacles as it turned. Its long, whip-like tongue lashed out from its maw, aiming straight for the Night Watch as if to swallow him alive. "You beast!" came the cry, a low, furious roar. The Night Watchman cut the restraint field on his weapon and charged at the falling monster. In the same instant, the cutting ray surged into being. He bellowed and brought his spear down. 100-meter-long blade of light extended from the shaft and came down with crushing force, cleaving the creature clean in two. The strike was flawless. Nur crystals could not be kept in an overloaded state for long. The firing principle was simple but brutal. In a matter of milliseconds, an enormous burst of energy, far more than what was required to sustain the blade, was dumped into the crystal to produce an exceptionally long cut. That extra output, however, could not be sustained. If the blade persisted longer than 10 milliseconds, the crystal would overload and shatter. Among the Night Watch, only a few had mastered the sweeping wide strikes of the dimensional light blade. With each cut, purple demonic blood spattered and ugly internal organs spilled onto the ground. The Slaaneshi beast, drunk on the sensation of dying, disintegrated to dust and vanished before their eyes. Its fall was the signal. The demon horde surged forward. The Keepers of Secrets laughed, their seductive songs drifting over the battlefield. Slender, sinuous bodies slipped into the Night Watch's ranks, and the two sides collided in brutal, close-quarters combat. Several members of the Watch surged at once, closing around a Keeper of Secrets, a great daemon determined to bring the monstrous commander down. They moved like one, long swords flashing from multiple directions, cutting in perfect, coordinated arcs. The Keeper's horizontal, demonic eyes took in the whole scene at once. All around it, it saw the attackers and the avenues of assault. 4 arms brandished twisted longswords, meeting the blades from the Night Watch with savage precision. A clear, metallic clang rang out. The sound made the Night Watch hesitate for a beat. No ordinary weapon had ever stood against a dimensional light blade and remained whole. The great demon's lips curved. The great demon moved with unexpected grace inside the circle, its 4 arms a blur as they spun and parried the Night Watch's strikes. Its voice was low and hoarse, laced with dark amusement. "Mortal, die!" It lunged, driving its longsword toward a Night Watch soldier who was just a fraction slow. There was a metallic clang, but no spray of blood and no cry of pain, only a brutal shock that rippled up the demon's arm. The great demon frowned and glanced at the man he'd struck. The human was bathed in blue light and had been hurled backward, unharmed aside from the force of the blow. Confusion passed over both sides. The blade in the demon's grip had been personally blessed by the Chaos God. Nothing should have been able to stop it, yet something, a shimmering dimensional shield, had absorbed the strike. At the same time, the Night Watch found their usually lethal weapons dulled, their blades and bolts failing to pierce the demons as they had before. "Surround it!" the Watch shouted, pouring more fighters into the ring. Their attacks came dense and relentless, leaving hardly any opening. The Keeper of Secrets, a great demon who had tasted victory countless times, finally felt pressure. These mortals were far more dangerous and far more skillful than he had expected. Their strength was less than his, but the moment their blades met his, the white-armored warriors used masterful technique to parry and redirect the blows, dissipating most of the force. His proud style found less and less room to operate inside the tightening ring. The Keeper's demonic eyes scanned the field. Every Slaaneshi beast had been cut down, the cavalry driven to the outskirts. When the hallucinations collapsed, the daemonettes were exposed and broke utterly. Only 4 Keepers of Secrets had escaped the long-range bombardment, among them the arrogant Shalaxi Hellbane, and now all 4 were trapped by the white-armored fighters. One by one, their stamina was being ground away. Defeat felt inevitable. The attackers had suffered losses too, but those deaths were too few to change the tide. Shalaxi Hellbane was fighting desperately. Its double-headed warblade swung without pause, shifting and snaking through its hands as it beat back the encircling soldiers again and again. The Daemon's once triumphant blades were no longer cutting a path to victory. Each strike was a struggle to hold the line. Demonic shields flared up like phantoms, fast, precise, intercepting every ranged strike. Even Shalaxi Hellbane's god-granted immunity to projectile attacks counted for nothing against their formation. Had this been ordinary missiles, Shalaxi, with a transcendent demonic body and the perverse knack for turning pain into pleasure, would have shrugged off the wounds and smashed through the ring. But a cunning rending beam found a seam in the defense and sliced through its Achilles tendon. "You lowly mortals," Shalaxi spat, no longer bothering to dodge. Desperation drove it forward. Brandishing blades and twin pincers, it tore into the circle and skewered two members of the Night Watch. Its eerie, androgynous voice shrieked, "I will return. I will surely wash away this humiliation. Die, you unnatural bastard!" The Night Watchmen, seeing their comrades fall, swallowed their fury and unleashed killing blows. With that tendon severed, Shalaxi's movements lost all grace. Like a gazelle with broken legs, it faltered in the encirclement, waiting for death. 59. Block for 8 hours. After a short rest, and after delegating the cleanup of the orc aftermath to the technicians, the Night Watch resumed their march toward the City of Truth. They moved at an astonishing pace, but the mood among the ranks was surprisingly calm. Their formation remained impeccable, ranks and files aligned, boots falling in step, as they cut across the Grand Mountains and followed the rails left by the Titan train, pressing steadily toward the city. The soldiers looked like torches in the landscape, backs straight as pines, their breathing almost synchronized. Striding across the green wasteland under the iridescent glow of the Crystal Mountains, the Night Watch, scarred and honored, enjoyed a rare moment of peace. Doom squinted against the sunlight, letting the warm, late-spring breeze brush his face. Even his razor-sharp mind allowed itself to pause and savor the quiet after battle. Scouts on the flanks stayed alert, riding anti-gravity motorcycles to screen and reconnoiter ahead of the marching column. The war fortress hovered in the center of the formation, positioned so the army could assemble quickly and use it as a base for a fast counterattack if the marching column were ambushed. The anti-gravity motorcycles that had seen heavy use in the fighting were now stowed inside the fortress. Only a few were kept out for reconnaissance, to avoid wasting scarce equipment. In Nur, anything technological had to be used sparingly. On the fortress terrace, Doom lounged in a chair, eyes half closed, and asked Harlan in a casual tone, "How are your injuries?" Harlan had his upper body armor removed and wrapped in gauze. He leaned against the railing. His spear was propped beside him, doubling as a stand for the IV. An emerald green potion dripped steadily into his arm, its gene-level repair compounds slowly mending damaged tissue. Healing potions were one of the few technological products Nur could manufacture. Their active components were extracted from herbal essences and were remarkably effective at promoting human cell regeneration. Unless a limb had been severed, flesh wounds could be healed perfectly, cells would regenerate, and the cuts would close. "Just some minor injuries," Harlan muttered, barely paying attention to the bruises and scrapes on his body. His focus was entirely on his hands, working with meticulous care. Under Harlan's skilled touch, the orc skull of Guya had been cleaned of flesh and tissue until it looked flawless. With a small knife, he carved the same pattern as the rune on Doom's chest into the skull's forehead. "To commemorate Guya, and the one who killed it," he said, as if declaring the piece a tribute. A perfect work of art honoring both the fallen orc and Doom. Erica stood quietly nearby, habitually watching Doom. She was quietly fascinated, trying to work out how a man could possess such formidable abilities. "My lord," a silky voice rang out, sharp with surprise. A slender finger flicked up and pointed directly at Doom's chest. Doom felt the pressure of it in the air and looked down. The rune on his chest faintly glowed red. The light was soft but alive, ebbing and flowing like breath. Harlan's expression tightened the moment he saw it. He squinted, instinctively unsettled. "I have a bad feeling about this," he said. His intuition was keen. When the mark began to glow, something in him went cold. Doom's relaxed expression hardened in an instant. His gaze shot like lightning toward the City of Truth. "We're almost at our next resupply point, aren't we?" "Yes, my lord." A liaison officer stepped forward, holding a small holographic projector that floated between them and revealed the next stop. "The next location is a Knight family town. Supplies have already been delivered." Doom nodded, but an unfamiliar agitation rose in him, a brief, undeniable tremor. Hatred and a bone-deep loathing swelled in his chest until he ground his teeth. "My lord," the voice of the lead ranger crackled over the comms, distorted by howling wind and electromagnetic static. He sounded as if he were shouting against a storm. "The Knight tribe shows no activity. Scanners detect no life signs." Harlan hauled himself up onto the railing. He ripped a small potion vial free from his belt, tore open the bandage across his chest, and glared at Doom with a look that said plainly, "I knew it wouldn't be that simple." The champion swordsman's instincts were razor-sharp. He was ready to fight by Doom's side at a moment's notice. "No!" he shouted, voice raw with warning and barely contained fury. "There's one person." The ranger's voice began in surprise and hardened into guarded hostility. "It's a priest from the City of Truth." Those in the command center exchanged worried looks. A priest this far out could only mean one thing: a breach in the City of Truth's blockade, and no message had come through to explain it. Doom's face went still. "Do not let anyone approach him," he ordered. "Other rangers, move out toward the Knight tribe and run a grid search of the surrounding area for any signs of enemy activity." After giving the orders, Doom glanced at Harlan as if to ask whether he was ready. Harlan hefted his spear, spun it a few times between his palms, and gave a curt nod. As the Night Watch advanced on the Knight tribe, dusk fell and the aurora drifted across the sky in pale, ribboned light. Doom stood on the terrace, his gaze sharp. When the ragged outline of the Knight tribe came into view on the horizon, his brow knit tightly. Whatever he saw had put him on edge. A settlement that should have been alive with nearly 100,000 people, guarded by Knight mechs and local armed forces, was unnervingly silent. No smoke rose from chimneys, no voices echoed through the streets. The town lay still, empty of any visible life. At the main gate, a man in red robes stood waiting, as if he had been there for a very long time. A rune on his chest flared red again. Doom narrowed his eyes and studied the priest closely. He did not trust the calm. "Notify the troops," he ordered. "Have them spread out and get into a defensive formation." The communications officer bowed and hurried away to relay the warlord's commands. "Let's go," Doom said, calling Harlan's name. The two of them swung onto their motorcycles and rode toward the priest. Under the low evening light, the silent settlement seemed to shrink into shadow, like a crouching beast holding its breath, waiting for whatever had been promised to it. Doom suspected the priest had expected him. His conspicuous robes and the steady stance at the gate left little doubt. When they drew near, the red-robed man slowly stood and then lowered himself to a knee. His voice was steady as he spoke, head bowed. "Greetings, warlord." Doom kept his gaze hard. "How did you get past the Night Watch's blockade?" he demanded. "Are you waiting for me?" Doom asked as he swung down from his vehicle, studying the priest in front of him. This priest didn't fit the usual image. Instead of the slim, mysterious type, he was broad-shouldered and as tall as Harlan, radiating a violent, flamboyant energy. He wore a blood-red robe trimmed with copper thread embroidery along the pleated hem, and a large waist token hung at his belt, an abstract brass figure 8. Doom frowned. He'd seen that symbol before. The chair that called itself the God of Warriors bore the same brass 8 at the top of its backrest. Good God! Seeing it again sealed his suspicion. His father had already crossed paths with him on a spiritual plane and had foreseen his coming. Before Nowick gave the order, the priest said without hesitation, we had already left the City of Truth with the Oracle. The priest didn't hedge or hide anything. He spoke plainly. Doom inclined his head slightly, finding no trace of a lie in the answer. The red-robed priest's voice came out muffled, and from beneath his hood 2 blood-red eyes glowed. By the blood god's oracle, I stop you here, if only for 8 hours. Doom let out a private, almost imperceptible sigh of relief. Leaving the City of Truth early had been dangerous. If they were being detained now, it meant the Night Watch's blockade was still holding, and if the Watch still held the line, then his elder brother and the army were still fighting. Harlan stepped forward, disdain dripping from every movement. "Just you?" he sneered. "A charlatan pretending to be a god?" His keen gaze locked on the priest, spear in hand and thumb already on the shaft, ready to end the man's life in an instant. The Night Watch had always held a natural contempt for priests who wielded psychic power, priests from the City of Truth among them. Warriors lived by the warrior's law. The future is pried open by the sword, and hope must be carved out by human hands. You did not buy tomorrow with prayers or prophecies. You earned it with courage. The Night Watch despised the priests of the City of Truth. To the guards, those red-robed zealots who surrendered everything to faith were nothing more than undignified supplicants, fanatics whose loud convictions hid fragile hearts. Faith meant weakness to them. Anyone who entrusted their fate entirely to a god was courting emptiness. Champion swordsman Harlan Ogilvy, the red-robed priest, fixed Harlan with a look of genuine reverence. "I am no match for you. Even with the blood god's blessing, I could not defeat you." Then his voice climbed in excitement. "Mighty warlord, beloved of the blood god." He turned to Doom, eager, hopeful. "Do you think I can hold you for 8 hours?" The question made Doom glance up at the silent town behind him. It looked abandoned, empty of life, but he could feel the presence of a tremendous, hidden power within its walls. "What about the people in the city?" Doom asked, unwilling to give up even though he already had a suspicion. The blood god was no benevolent deity. The city's inhabitants were probably doomed. The red-robed priest's aim was obvious: stall Doom for 8 hours. He was perfectly willing to use conversation as a delay tactic, so he didn't object to answering. "None survived. They were butchered," the priest declared, almost boastful as he lifted his chin. "They were sacrifices so the blood god's servants could descend, and a way to stop you." A thin electric buzz cut through his words as a sapphire-blue spear blade pierced the priest's hood and came to rest against his shoulder. With a slight twist, it could have taken his head off. "Don't move, priest," Harlan roared. The strike was swift and precise. The blade sang through the air, and a sudden wash of killing intent closed over the priest. "You're pinned. With no one to preside, the ritual is meaningless. Just symbols and words." Harlan's years of anti-psyker work had taught him that when facing sorcerers and psykers, preemption was the best strategy. The priest made a small, contemptuous and no more. "If killing me would help." The red-robed priest breathed the line as if savoring the knife edge of the killing intent, his eyes flicking to Doom with a nasty smile. "Your master would have torn me to pieces before you could even blink." "The blood god's power is upon us, warlord. He comes for you," someone cried. The ground shuddered. The priest fell to his knees, eyes wild with fanaticism, and began to chant at the top of his lungs, "Blood for the blood god, skulls for the skull throne." At first it looked like a column of light rising from the Night family's town. Then everyone saw what it really was, a geyser of blood. The slaughter of nearly 100,000 townsfolk boiled and surged into the air, a living, howling tide of gore. "You'll never see your god, you bastard," Harlan spat. He caught Doom's brief nod, and without hesitation, swept his spear in a single clean arc. The priest's head flew free. The Night Watch had sworn to protect the people of Nur. Even amid endless wars, they kept their discipline, measured their force. A fanatic offering 100,000 lives as a pledge to his god was something they could not and would not tolerate. Harlan, biting back his fury, lopped the cultist's head clean from his shoulders. Even in death, the worshipper's face wore an expression of fearless piety. Doom hauled Harlan back to the Night Watch, and they retreated a few paces, but it was already too late. The sacrificial rite had been completed long before the group arrived. It had only been waiting for the moment to be triggered. A hot, surging sea of blood rose and stained the sky crimson. Space itself split like a shattered mirror. The void ripped open, and warp energy poured through, condensing into a river of blood that fell from above. "Everyone, be on guard!" Doom's voice cracked like thunder, as if even those blood-red clouds could be torn apart. "This enemy is like nothing we've faced, unprecedentedly powerful." Evil, pure malice, descended from the torn void. Furious manifestations of that hatred began to tear through reality and spill into their world. The Night Watch screamed into action. Every power armor servo kicked to life. Shields hummed and weapons came online. They snapped into a battle formation, ready for whatever poured through the breach. None of them had ever seen the warlord so unsettled. Even facing orcs, he had always been composed and confident. Now his urgency told them everything. They were facing something far worse. The surging sea of blood crashed down, filling the air with the sour sting of sulfur and the metallic tang of brass. Where the red tide churned, the knight's town was swept away as if it had never existed. From that heaving ocean rose massive, malevolent shapes formed of coagulating gore, their bloody hooves trampling the earth as they came ashore. Before their outlines were even fully clear, a raw, instinctive Alice stabbed into the minds of the Night Watch, telling them exactly what these were. The crimson figures towered like living statues of rage, about 8.8 meters tall, with skin the color of fresh blood, muscles hot and taut as if aflame. Their heads were an impossible composite of ox, sheep, and hound. Each exhalation sent sparks from flaring nostrils, and their demonic eyes burned with pure fury. White teeth gleamed behind snarling jaws, clenched to restrain a maddening urge to slaughter. They wore ancient brass armor scored by countless battles and bore grotesque, terrible weapons, bladed axes and swords, long whips, serrated blades, and monstrous battle axes. Bat-like wings unfurled behind them, casting shadows that left no corner safe, no weakness to exploit. Bloodthirsters, born of the furious will of Khorne, the blood god, pure embodiments of violence and slaughter. 88 of them. They had come for one purpose only, to claim skulls for the skull throne. Gurgle, gurgle, gurgle! The laugh of the greater demon of Khorne rolled over the field, a sickening, alien sound, like a dog's gurgle braided with the choked sobs of an ox or sheep. It was grotesque and terrifying. Panic rippled through the Night Watch. The technical crew who had come with them, having seen the daemon, suddenly had their hidden fury erupt. Whatever the thing broadcast into the air turned to blind, murderous rage, and they began lashing out at anyone nearby. Kill! The warlord's order cut through the chaos, crisp, absolute, without a hint of hesitation. Doom watched with a puzzled expression. He had the distinct impression that whenever those servants of the blood god appeared, they transmitted something to everyone around them, an image, a compulsion, some malignant message. Harlan drew several deep breaths, forcing down the bloodlust the daemon had ignited in him, and explained quietly to Doom, "They're demons, bloodthirsters." Harlan wasn't surprised by the effect on their men. Perhaps Doom was simply that powerful, and the demon's malice couldn't touch him. Doom, however, felt nothing. He did not understand why he could not pick up whatever the daemon was broadcasting. He wasn't at ease either, a new, unfamiliar sensation that surged through him the instant he saw the daemons. His heart roared, his body trembled slightly, an oddity for someone who normally held absolute control. Still it happened, undeniable, unavoidable. The blood-red sigil on his chest no longer flared. Its light had dimmed, though it had not gone out. The brief blaze of hatred from before returned, raw and hot, and Doom had to force every ragged breath to keep from tearing the bloodthirsters limb from limb. The lead daemon spoke. Towering above the others, he held an axe in one hand and a whip in the other. He announced himself with a voice like grinding iron. "I am Angrath, the first bloodthirster of the blood god, guardian of the skull throne, come by the oracle of the skull throne." Then he lifted his axe, pointing it at Doom, and bellowed the name, Doom. Angrath. Before Angrath's coming, Skarbrand had been Khorne's chief greater demon. Skarbrand had claimed countless souls for Khorne, piled mountains of skulls, ripped open one of Slaanesh's 6 rings, routed the combined forces of 3 gods, and defended the honor of the skull throne itself. Khorne possessed such a fearsome champion, and even Tzeentch burned with envy. Someone had whispered in Skarbrand's ear, goading him to lift his blade against Khorne. The betrayal came like a lightning strike. Skarbrand sprang his ambush and managed to nick the blood god's brass armor, an almost insignificant crack, before Khorne himself seized the traitor in a whirlwind of wrath and hurled him out of the warp, banished from the god's domain. Khorne was furious at the loss of his favorite general. In his rage, he forged a new champion, Angrath, vast in power and unflinchingly loyal. He stood as the guardian of the skull throne, the living embodiment of Khorne's appetite for slaughter, the perfected instrument of war and destruction. A bloodthirster nearby let loose a strained, jealous growl. Twisted by eternal fury, its voice rasped, "The blood god values you highly, more than you know. He is patient with you. He even changed his oracle for your sake." Doom said nothing. He stared at the chattering daemon, smothering a rising fury, afraid his own hands would move before his reason. Harlan, standing beside him, noticed the slight tremor in his lord's grip as he fought to control himself. The ranks of the 88 bloodthirsters shifted restlessly. Sparks crackled from Angrath's nostrils as the new guardian exhaled, and his voice cut through the tumult. "You wish to save your brother. The blood god favors that eagerness. He says you can leave as soon as you defeat us. Not in 8 hours, the bloodthirster had boomed, its voice like grinding iron. The promise hung in the air, a savage, conditional mercy. Angrath's voice cut through the din, frantic and constant. "Ennio is under attack." Doom snapped to attention. The chatter left no room for doubt. Ennio was fighting, and his attackers were almost certainly demons. Demons were scraping at their flanks to keep Doom from reaching him. That much Angrath's frantic reports made clear. Doom looked out over the battlefield. A wall of slavering fiends surged between him and Ennio, and beyond them, the towering bloodthirsters loomed like mountains. Doom was small beside them, but when he lifted his head, his gaze was colder than their bulk and fell on the horde with the certainty of command. This was a duel he could not refuse, and right now, it was the only choice that made sense. "Come on, then," he said to the demons, his voice low and hard. "Let's see what you're worth." There was something almost absurd about feeling gratitude from such a thing, but Doom could not deny it. In the bloodthirsters' words he tasted a kind of tolerance, the blood god's perverse favor. The creatures were hideous and terrible. They would have shredded the Night Watch if they had charged full force. Against Doom himself, they were less of a danger, but that did nothing to lessen how bloody and cruel their coming battle would be. "My lord, trust us," someone from the Night Watch called up, voice tight with urgency. They were offering to hold the line while Doom pushed through to buy him the time he needed to reach Ennio. Doom's jaw tightened. There was no time for second-guessing. He nodded once, a curt motion that sent the order, "Hold and live to fight another day." Then he moved, cutting through darkness and blood to meet the demons head-on. "The warriors are ready to fight with you. Together we can cut them down," Harlan shouted, pacing with nervous energy. The Night Watch behind him bristled with the same eager ferocity. No more orders were necessary. Warriors need no speeches, only a foe to face. Doom held up a hand to halt them. They did not fear death, but as their warlord he valued every one of them. The blood god had come for him, and this was his reckoning to settle. "Night Watch, hold your positions. Cheer if you must, but do not advance. I will return victorious," he commanded, steady and unyielding. He did not think the bloodthirsters would strike from hiding. There was a quiet certainty in him. Savage and abominable as they were, the bloodthirsters would not stoop to breaking the rules of a duel. "Come then, fight to your heart's content," Angrath bellowed, bringing his axe crashing down. The earth convulsed as the warp ritual took hold. Reality twisted, and an arena 88 meters across rose from the ground, ringed with skulls and forged from brass and dark, congealed blood.